At Thanksgiving dinner, my mother looked around the table, then complained loud enough for everyone to hear that the $12,000 monthly allowance from my millionaire husband was nowhere near enough to support her lifestyle. The room fell completely silent. Everyone waited for me to cave to her demands. But when my husband calmly wiped his mouth and revealed a secret she had been hiding for years, her confident smirk vanished instantly. My name is Maya, and I am 32 years old. I am the CEO of a luxury consulting firm in Atlanta, Georgia. For years, I was the family scapegoat, the one whose only purpose was to finance the golden child of the family while silently enduring their disrespect. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to set ruthless boundaries with a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. Growing up in our community meant that appearances were everything. My mother, Yvonne, was the head of the event committee at our prominent church, and her entire identity was built on social status. To the outside world, we were the perfect affluent family. But inside the walls of her pristine suburban home, emotional manipulation was the main course served at every meal. The expectation placed heavily on my shoulders was what many call the black tax, the unspoken obligation that the successful family member must financially carry the rest of the family, no matter the personal cost. The Thanksgiving dinner that changed my life forever started like any other holiday gathering at my mother's house. The dining room was overwhelming with the smell of roasted turkey, baked macaroni and cheese, collard greens, and sweet potato pie. Crystal glasses sparkled under the massive chandelier, and 15 of our extended relatives were seated around the long mahogany table. I sat quietly near the end of the table, nursing a glass of sparkling water. Next to me was my husband, Julian. Julian is 36 years old, a brilliant self-made venture capitalist who built his investment firm from nothing. He knew exactly how toxic my family could be, and he gently rested his hand on my knee under the table, giving me a silent anchor of support. Directly across from us sat my older brother Darius and his wife Keisha. Darius is 34 and has not held a steady job in 5 years. He was a high school football star whose minor knee injury somehow gave him a lifelong excuse to avoid actual labor. Instead, he called himself an entrepreneur. Currently, he was leaning over his plate, loudly pitching a revolutionary app idea to my Uncle David and Aunt Valerie. It was an app that had no business plan, no code, and zero revenue, but Darius spoke about it as if he were the next tech billionaire. Beside him, Keisha was making sure everyone noticed her brand new Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag. She had deliberately placed the wildly expensive designer purse on the empty chair next to her, ensuring the gold hardware caught the light from the chandelier. Keisha loved to play the role of a wealthy socialite, constantly making backhanded compliments about my simple dresses or my dedication to my business. I watched her sip her wine and felt a familiar knot of resentment twisting in my stomach. I had spent my 20s working 80-hour weeks to build my luxury consulting firm. I missed vacations, skipped social events, and poured every ounce of my energy into my career. Meanwhile, Darius slept until noon and received endless praise from my mother, simply for existing. The clinking of silverware stopped when my mother stood up at the head of the table. She wore a tailored emerald green dress and a string of pearls looking like royalty holding court. She tapped her spoon against her crystal wine glass, demanding the attention of the entire room. "I want to take a moment to give thanks for our beautiful family," my mother began, her voice projecting clearly across the dining room. "We are a shining example of excellence and generational wealth. It is a blessing to see everyone gathered here today." A murmur of agreement went around the table, but I knew my mother too well. The sugary sweet introduction was always a setup for a public demand. She turned her gaze directly toward me and Julian, and her smile turned sharp and calculating. However, my mother continued, her tone shifting from gracious to businesslike. "I think we need to have a serious family discussion. Maya, I think you need to speak with Julian about your contributions to this household. The $12,000 monthly allowance you two provide is simply no longer sufficient for a respectable family legacy." The dining room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the hardwood floor. Uncle David stopped mid-bite. Aunt Valerie stared with wide eyes. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mother did not miss a beat. She stood taller, soaking in the attention. Keisha is pregnant with my first grandson. They need to move out of their current place and get a proper estate in the Buckhead neighborhood. Darius needs seed money for his new tech venture. Julian, you are a very wealthy man, and Maya, you run a successful little business. $12,000 a month is pocket change to you. It is time to elevate this family properly. I expect the allowance to be raised to $25,000 a month starting in December. That is how our people survive. We lift each other up. She looked at me with absolute expectation, fully believing that the pressure of a public audience would force me to lower my head and agree. She was weaponizing family loyalty and public shame to extort me right over the Thanksgiving turkey. I opened my mouth to speak, but I was completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her demand. Before I could form a sentence, I felt Julian shift beside me. Julian did not look angry. He did not raise his voice. He calmly picked up his linen napkin, wiped the corners of his mouth, and placed it neatly next to his plate. He looked directly at my mother with the cold, calculating gaze of a man who destroys predatory companies for a living. With all due respect, Mother Yvonne, Julian said, his voice deep and smooth, echoing clearly in the silent room. I do not send you $12,000 a month. In fact, I have never sent Darius or Keisha a single dime of my money. Panic flashed across my mother's face. Her confident posture faltered. What are you talking about? She stammered. The wire transfers hit my account on the first of every month. I know you are funding it. I am a venture capitalist, Julian replied, leaning back in his chair. I audit every cent that leaves my accounts. I do not fund unverified business ventures, and I certainly do not fund designer handbags. If you are receiving $12,000 a month, it is not coming from my wealth. The realization hit me like a freight train. The air was knocked completely out of my lungs. I looked at Julian, then at my mother, and finally at Keisha Birkenbag. 6 months ago, my mother had called me sobbing hysterically. She told me the bank was foreclosing on this very house. She claimed her church salary had been cut, and a bad investment had wiped out her savings. She begged me for help, swearing she would be out on the street if I did not intervene. Wanting to protect her pride, I kept the situation a secret even from Julian. I quietly arranged for my corporate consulting accounts to wire her $12,000 every single month to cover the mortgage and the late fees. But looking at the lavish Thanksgiving spread, the expensive new furniture in the living room, and the designer accessories draped all over my brother and sister-in-law, the horrific truth snapped into focus. There was no foreclosure. There was no financial crisis. My mother had fabricated the entire story to extort my hard-earned money and funnel it directly to Darius and Keisha to fund their luxury lifestyle. You lied to me, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. The room shifted its collective gaze to me. My mother gripped the edge of her chair, her emerald dress suddenly looking less like royalty and more like a costume. Maya, do not make a scene, my mother warned, her eyes darting nervously toward the extended family. We can discuss the logistics of the transfers later. There was no foreclosure, I said, my voice growing louder and firmer as the absolute betrayal hardened my heart. I sent you that money from my personal corporate accounts because you cried on the phone and told me you were going to be homeless. You told me the bank was taking the house. Keisha looked at my mother, her eyes wide with shock. You told us the money was a gift from your church investment fund, Keisha blurted out. You said you bought me this bag as a congratulations for the baby. Darius slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. Who cares where the money came from? He shouted aggressively. Maya is loaded. She owes this family for everything Mom sacrificed for her. If she has the money to spare, she should be funding my app anyway. I am the man of this family and I deserve a proper start. The sheer entitlement radiating from my brother extinguished any lingering trace of guilt or sadness I possessed. I looked at the people who were supposed to be my family and saw nothing but parasites. You deserve absolutely nothing, I said, standing up from the table. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. You have not worked a day in 5 years, Darius. And you, mother, you used my empathy and my love to rob me blind just to spoil a grown man who refuses to provide for himself. Maya, watch your tone with me, my mother shrieked, abandoning all pretense of elegance. I gave you life. I raised you. If I demand $25,000 a month, you will pay it because you owe your success to my prayers. You are a selfish, ungrateful girl who forgot her roots the second a rich man put a ring on her finger. Julian stood up smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket. He placed a protective hand on the small of my back. Actually, Yvonne, Julian said, his voice like ice. Maya owes her success to her 80-hour work weeks and her brilliant mind. You owe your lifestyle to her generosity. But since you want to discuss finances publicly, consider this official notice. I looked my mother dead in the eye, feeling a sense of ultimate liberation wash over me. The $12,000 a month stops today, I declared, my voice ringing with finality. I am canceling the wire transfers the moment I walk out that door. You will not see another penny from my company, from my husband, or from me. Good luck buying your Buckhead estate with Darius' imaginary app revenue. My mother's face contorted with pure rage. You walk out that door, Maya, and you are dead to me. You hear me? You will not have a family to come back to when this man leaves you. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. I would rather have no family than a family of thieves, I replied coldly. Julian and I turned our backs on the screaming matriarch and the stunned relatives. We walked out of the dining room, leaving the lavish Thanksgiving feast completely untouched on the table. The heavy mahogany front door slammed shut behind us, cutting off my mother, frantic yelling. As we walked down the driveway toward our car, the cool November air hit my face, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely free from the suffocating weight of their expectations. But as I would soon discover, my mother was not the type of woman to let her primary source of income walk away without a fight. 2 days after the Thanksgiving disaster, I was sitting quietly in the pristine glass-walled boardroom of my downtown Atlanta agency. The skyline of the city stretched out behind me, a testament to the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. I was in the middle of closing a massive corporate retreat contract with 3 executives from a Fortune 500 tech firm. The atmosphere was highly professional, refined, and perfectly controlled. I was walking them through the financial logistics of a week-long event in Dubai when that control shattered. Exactly at 10:15 in the morning, loud, aggressive shouting erupted from my reception area. The heavy mahogany doors of my boardroom flew open violently, banging against the glass partitions with a deafening crash. My clients jumped in their leather seats, their coffee spilling onto the polished table. Darius and Keisha stormed into the room, looking like a pair of deranged reality television stars. Keisha was wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors, clutching the exact same Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag she had flaunted at the Thanksgiving table. Darius looked absolutely furious, his face flushed with sweat and unearned rage. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that I knew for a fact was purchased with the funds I had sent my mother. "Maya, you are going to fix this right now!" Keisha shrieked, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "You are going to call the bank and unfreeze that account before I lose my mind." I stood up slowly, maintaining my composure despite the sheer mortification of having my corporate clients witness this absolute circus. I turned to my clients and apologized smoothly, requesting a brief recess. They hurriedly packed their leather briefcases and practically sprinted out of the room, casting bewildered and deeply alarmed glances at my brother and sister-in-law, who were currently blocking the main exit. Once the door clicked shut, I turned my attention back to the intruders. "You have lost your mind coming into my place of business like this," I said, my voice dangerously low. Darius stepped forward, invading my personal space and slamming his fists on the table. "You humiliated me!" he bellowed. "Do you have any idea what just happened to me? I was at the Range Rover dealership in Buckhead. I had the keys to a brand new autobiography edition in my hand. I had the sales team treating me like a king. I went to run the card for the down payment and it declined. The finance manager laughed at me, Maya. He laughed right in my face and told me the account was frozen. My boys were with me. I have never been so disrespected in my entire life. I stared at him, absolutely astounded by the sheer depth of his delusion. You are furious because a credit card linked to my money declined when you tried to buy a $100,000 luxury vehicle for yourself, I asked. It is our money, Keisha interjected, slamming her own hands on the conference table next to his. Family money? You owe us. You have millions of dollars sitting around while we are trying to prepare for a baby and secure our future in a proper neighborhood. How selfish can you be keeping all this wealth to yourself when your own flesh and blood is trying to elevate their status? I am not funding your luxury vehicles or your designer bags, I stated firmly, looking directly into Keisha's eyes. The free ride is officially over. Both of you need to leave my office right this second before I call building security and have you physically removed. Darius' face twisted into a mask of pure entitlement and unhinged fury. You owe me your life, he screamed, stepping so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. You think you are so brilliant with your little consulting agency? You think you built this empire on your own? You are absolutely nothing without the sacrifices this family made for you. Sacrifices, I asked, my voice dripping with icy sarcasm. Please enlighten me, Darius. What exactly did you sacrifice for my success? He paced the room, waving his arms wildly and knocking a stack of presentation folders onto the floor. If Mom had not forced you to quit that stupid high school internship to stay home and write my college admission essays, I would have made it to the National Football League. I had scouts looking at me, Maya. I had Division I recruiters coming to my games. But I needed those essays to get the academic scholarships, and you complained the whole time you were writing them. You brought bad energy into the house. You ruined my focus. You ruined my football career. I should be a multi-millionaire athlete right now living in a mansion, but you dragged me down. The logic was so deeply flawed, so utterly ridiculous, that I could not even formulate a proper response. He was blaming me for his failed football career because our mother forced me, a high school junior, to write his college applications for him while he partied with his friends. He genuinely believed that my forced unpaid labor was somehow his grand sacrifice. You owe me for the life I could have had, Darius roared. He grabbed a heavy acrylic display stand sitting on the side credenza and hurled it across the room. It smashed violently into the far wall, completely shattering a beautifully framed business award I had proudly received from the Atlanta Chamber of Commerce just last month. Thick shards of broken glass rained down on the plush carpet, making a sharp, sickening crunching sound as Darius deliberately stepped on the fragments. Pay what you owe us. Maya Keisha chimed in, her voice shrill and demanding. Call the bank right now and fix this, or we are not leaving. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show them a single ounce of fear. I simply reached under the lip of the conference table and pressed the silent panic button wired directly to the building's central security office. My husband Julian ran his venture capital firm 3 floors above my agency. I had specifically chosen this building so we could be close to each other during the workday. When security received an emergency alert from my office, their protocol was to notify Julian immediately before stepping in. Less than 60 seconds later, the heavy boardroom doors swung open again. Julian stepped into the room, flanked by 2 massive armed security guards. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, his expression completely unreadable. He did not look angry. He looked like a man evaluating a pest problem that needed to be eradicated. Julian, Keisha gasped, stepping back from the shattered glass on the floor, her false bravado instantly evaporating. Julian did not say a word to her. He pulled his smartphone from his breast pocket, lifted it, and hit record. He calmly panned the camera across the broken glass, the damaged wall, the overturned folders, and finally settled the lens on Darius' sweating red face. State your business in my wife office, Julian said, his voice dangerously calm and authoritative. Darius puffed out his chest, trying to physically intimidate a man who was entirely unimpressed by his posturing. Tell your wife to turn the accounts back on Julian. This is family business. You need to stay out of it before things get ugly. Julian lowered his phone, saving the footage with a quick tap of his thumb. Gentlemen, he said, addressing the security guards without taking his eyes off my brother. These 2 individuals are trespassing. They have vandalized private corporate property and threatened the chief executive officer of this firm. Escort them off the premises immediately. If they resist in any way, contact the Atlanta Police Department and press formal charges for destruction of property and terroristic threats. You cannot do this, Darius yelled, as the guard stepped forward, grabbing him firmly by the arms. I am her brother. You cannot throw family out on the street. You are a liability, Julian corrected smoothly, his tone completely devoid of emotion. And as of this moment, you are permanently banned from this building. If you step foot on this property again, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Keisha tried to swat away the guard reaching for her arm. Do not touch me, she shrieked, her voice echoing down the hallway. My bag is worth more than your entire yearly salary. The guards were entirely unbothered by her insults. They marched a struggling, cursing Darius and a wildly flailing Keisha out of the boardroom down the main corridor and into the private elevator. The silence they left behind was absolutely deafening. Julian walked over to me, inspecting my face and posture for any signs of injury or lingering distress. Are you hurt? He asked softly, his thumb gently brushing my cheek. I shook my head, exhaling a long breath I did not realize I was holding. I am fine, I promised, just exhausted by their constant audacity. Julian kissed my forehead, his protective presence grounding me in the chaotic aftermath. I have the footage secured, he assured me. We will add it to the file. They just gave us all the evidence we need to prove their hostility. My mobile phone began to vibrate aggressively on the polished wood of the conference table before the private elevator, carrying my irate brother and his furious wife, had even reached the ground floor of the building. The caller identification flashed my mother name, Yvonne. She had wasted absolutely no time. I picked up the device, answering the call and putting it on speaker mode so Julian could hear every word of the impending manipulation. Maya. My mother's voice trembled thick with manufactured tears and exaggerated heartbreak. I just got off the phone with your brother. How could you humiliate Darius like that? Having him physically thrown out of a commercial building like a common criminal. He is your flesh and blood. He smashed a heavy acrylic display stand in my executive office and aggressively demanded I buy him a $100,000 Range Rover, I replied coldly. He is incredibly lucky I did not have him arrested and thrown in a holding cell. My mother dropped the crying act instantly. Her voice hardened, turning into a vicious snarl that stripped away all her church-going elegance. You are going to reinstate that $12,000 monthly transfer, Maya. You are going to do it today before the banks close. No, I am not, I stated firmly, leaning against the conference table. I told you explicitly on Thanksgiving. You will never see another dime from my accounts. The bank is permanently closed to you. There was a long, chilling pause on the other end of the line. When my mother spoke again, the venom in her words was absolute and calculated. You think you are so untouchable up in your high-rise office, Yvonne hissed through the speaker. You think you are better than us because you married a rich man and wear fancy suits. If you do not wire that money to my account by the end of business today, I am going straight to Pastor Thomas. I am going to the deacon board and every elite social circle in this congregation. I will tell them all that the great and successful Maya built her entire luxury consulting business using stolen funds. I will tell everyone who will listen that you committed wire fraud to get your startup capital and that you have been scamming innocent people for years. I stared at the phone, genuinely shocked by the sheer malice of her strategy. You would openly lie to our church community just to destroy my professional reputation, I asked. My mother laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. The church believes the praying mother Maya. They always believe the devoted matriarch over the rebellious, arrogant daughter. I will ruin your reputation in this city before Sunday service even begins. I will make sure you do not have a single corporate client left by the time I am done dragging your name through the mud. You have until 5:00 to make the transfer. She ended the call abruptly, leaving a harsh dial tone echoing endlessly in the quiet wreckage of my beautiful boardroom. I stood there looking at the shattered glass on the carpet, realizing that this was no longer just a family dispute. This was an outright declaration of war. My mother was completely willing to burn my entire life to the ground just to keep funding her golden child. I dropped the mobile phone onto the polished conference table, as if the device had physically burned my hand. The harsh dial tone finally timed out, replaced by a suffocating heavy silence in the boardroom. My legs gave out beneath me, and I sank heavily into one of the leather executive chairs, burying my face in my trembling hands. The tears I had fought so fiercely to suppress in front of my brother finally spilled over hot and bitter. It was one thing to be unappreciated, to be the family mule expected to carry everyone's financial burdens, but this was a completely different level of betrayal. My own mother was actively plotting to destroy the corporate business I had sacrificed my 20s to build, all to ensure my adult brother never had to work a single honest day in his entitled life. Julian walked over immediately and pulled me into his arms, letting me cry into his tailored suit jacket without offering empty platitudes. He simply held me tightly, running his hand down my back, until my erratic breathing finally steadied. But as I pulled away to wipe my eyes, I noticed a profound shift in his demeanor. The comforting husband had vanished, replaced entirely by the ruthless venture capitalist who dismantled corrupt corporate boards for a living. His dark eyes were fixed intently on the phone, resting on the table, his mind clearly calculating variables at lightning speed. Maya, Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, highly analytical timbre. Think about what she just said. I want you to really analyze her exact choice of words. I sniffled, grabbing a tissue from the side table to dab at my ruined makeup. She said she's going to tell Pastor Thomas and the entire congregation that I am a scammer. She wants to ruin my professional reputation so I lose all my luxury clients. No, Julian corrected, pacing across the room and stepping over the shattered glass. She did not just use generic insults, she used highly specific legal terminology. She specifically said wire fraud and forged signatures. Why would a woman whose entire life revolves around church bake sales and choir practice jump straight to federal financial crimes? That is way too specific for a random church rumor. I frowned, trying to follow his precise logic through the thick fog of my emotional exhaustion. You think she is projecting? You think she actually knows something about wire fraud? I think Julian stated flatly that people who invent lies build them on a hidden foundation of their own truth. Your mother spoke with far too much confidence. She sounded exactly like a woman holding a loaded gun, fully believing she had the ammunition to back it up. Julian refused to let me be bullied by what we hoped were empty threats, but he was also not a man who left dangerous blind spots in his defense strategy. He insisted we needed absolute clarity on my entire financial history, leaving no stone unturned. Without alerting Yvonne Darius or anyone else in my toxic family, Julian initiated a covert operation. He bypassed local Atlanta firms to avoid any chance of gossip leaking back to my mother's social circle, instead reaching out to a top-tier forensic accounting firm based in Chicago. A team of elite investigators he frequently used for hostile corporate takeovers. Julian authorized a massive immediate retainer fee and gave them a singular terrifying mandate audit my entire financial existence. He instructed the Chicago team to dig ruthlessly into my credit history, tax returns, and banking records going back to the day I turned 18. We needed to know exactly what vulnerabilities existed in my past. We are going to find out exactly what your mother thinks she is holding over your head. Julian promised me that night as we sat in our living room, the glowing city lights of Atlanta glittering outside our floor-to-ceiling windows. And once we know her hand, we are going to break her fingers. The following week was an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare. While the forensic accountants in Chicago quietly tore through decades of encrypted financial data, I had to maintain total agonizing radio silence. Julian strictly forbade me from answering any phone calls or text messages from my mother Darius or Keisha. The absolute silence infuriated them, prompting them to escalate their attacks to the public digital sphere. Since my mother could not reach me directly to extort the $25,000 she demanded, Keisha eagerly took up the mantle of public harassment. She launched a relentless passive-aggressive campaign on social media. My Instagram feed quickly became a toxic minefield of thinly veiled insults and cultural weaponization aimed directly at my reputation. Keisha began posting elaborate stories, posing with her luxury items in front of Buckhead estates she delusionally believed they were going to buy with my money. Her captions were explicitly designed to assassinate my character. She posted a photo of her and Darius at a high-end brunch spot, with the caption, "Nothing is worse than fake successful Black women who step on their own families to get to the top. Never forget who held you down when you were nothing. Real queens uplift their brothers." Another post featured a quote graphic about new money-changing people, followed by a bitter rant about women marrying rich men and turning their backs on their community. She strategically tagged several prominent members of our church congregation, subtly ensuring the gossip mill began churning exactly as my mother had promised during her unhinged phone call. The sheer audacity of her public lies was astounding. My self-control was tested to its absolute limit. Every single time my phone buzzed with a notification showing another one of Keisha's venomous posts, my blood boiled hotly in my veins. I desperately wanted to comment back. I wanted to post the security footage of Darius trashing my boardroom like a petulant child. I wanted to publicly expose them for the greedy leeches they truly were. I drafted dozens of scathing replies in my notes app, my thumbs flying across the digital keyboard with furious precision. But every time I was about to hit send, Julian would gently take the phone from my shaking hands. "Hold the line, Maya," he would say. "Do not engage with clowns. You do not win a chess match by throwing the pieces off the board. We let them talk. We let them build their false narrative. The louder they are right now, the harder they will fall when we finally pull the rug out from under them." I forced myself to breathe, to trust my husband's tactical mind. I muted Keisha's accounts, blocked Darius's number, and threw myself entirely into my corporate work. I focused on delivering flawless execution for my luxury clients, ensuring that my professional reputation remained completely bulletproof against any wild rumors my mother might attempt to spread through Pastor Thomas's congregation. I made sure every invoice was accounted for, leaving zero room for professional error. But the anxiety was a constant low-level hum in the back of my mind, gnawing at my focus every single minute of the day. What were the Chicago accountants going to find? I knew for a fact I had never committed fraud. I had built my luxury consulting firm through sheer willpower, countless sleepless nights, and legitimate small business loans that I had paid back meticulously. My credit score was immaculate. My corporate taxes were filed flawlessly. I had absolutely nothing to hide. Yet the absolute chilling certainty in my mother's voice during that phone call haunted my thoughts. She had been too eager, too vicious, too confident. She truly believed she possessed the ultimate power to destroy me completely. On the 7th day of our agonizing wait, the weather in Atlanta took a sharp cold turn, perfectly matching the icy dread settling in my stomach. I was sitting at my kitchen island nursing a cup of black coffee and reviewing a venue contract for an upcoming celebrity charity gala when Julian walked through the front door. It was only 2 in the afternoon, far too early for him to be home from the venture capital firm. His jaw was clenched tight, a visible muscle ticking in his cheek. He was carrying a thick, heavy black leather binder embossed with the logo of the Chicago forensic accounting firm. He dropped his briefcase and placed the binder on the marble kitchen island right in front of me. The heavy thud of the binder seemed to echo endlessly in the quiet, empty house. They finished the extensive audit, Julian said, his voice completely devoid of its usual warmth. It was flat, mechanical, and terrifyingly cold. I looked down at the thick leather binder, suddenly feeling as though it were a live explosive device sitting on my counter. "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling, barely a whisper. "What did they find?" Julian looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine heartbreak in his dark eyes. "Not for him, but for me." "Maya," he said softly, reaching across the cool marble island to take both of my hands in his. "I need you to brace yourself. Everything you thought you knew about your financial history and your mother's supposed hardships is a complete, terrifying lie. She did not just threaten you with wire fraud. She actively authored it, she orchestrated it for years, and she deliberately used your good name to do it without an ounce of regret." I opened the thick binder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the first page. Staring back at me were copies of official banking documents, massive loan applications, and property deeds. Every single page bore a signature that looked exactly like mine, but was signed years before I had ever established my own consulting business. The truth was laid out in black and white, printed on the immaculate letterhead of the forensic accounting firm. My mother had not just been taking $12,000 a month. She had been stealing my identity to fund the very lifestyle she claimed I was ruining. I stared at the thick stack of papers, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted lines and highlighted figures provided by the Chicago team. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. 10 years ago, while I was a struggling college student living on instant noodles and working overnight shifts at a call center to pay for my textbooks, my mother was busy orchestrating a financial masterstroke using my pristine Social Security number. I flipped to the second tab in the binder, the pages heavy and damning. There it was. The original mortgage application for the sprawling suburban mansion my mother currently lived in. The estate she constantly bragged about at church, the home where she hosted extravagant holiday dinners and looked down her nose at anyone renting an apartment. The loan was for exactly $500,000. The primary applicant listed on the deed was not Yvonne, it was Maya. My signature had been flawlessly forged on dozens of pages. I traced the curves of the ink with a trembling finger, feeling a wave of intense nausea wash over me. She had stolen my identity before I even had a chance to build it. She had leveraged my immaculate unused credit score to secure a luxury home for herself while I was literally drowning in student debt. But the horror did not stop at the real estate. Julian gently reached over and flipped to the third section of the audit. "Look at the commercial credit lines," Julian instructed, his voice tight with suppressed rage. My eyes widened as I read the corporate loan disclosures. There were 3 separate business loans totaling over $200,000, all taken out under my name. The funds had been transferred to a series of now-defunct limited liability companies. The registered agent for every single one of those failed ventures was Darius. My brother had never been a legitimate entrepreneur. He had never raised a single dime of actual seed money. His entire identity as a visionary founder, the very reason my mother constantly praised him as the golden child, was entirely funded by fraudulent loans taken out in my name. I had unwittingly financed his delusions of grandeur, paying for his expensive business suits, his leased luxury cars, and his overpriced networking dinners, all while he mocked me for working hard. Then the most sickening realization of all hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The math suddenly made terrifying, absolute sense. The $12,000, I gasped, my voice catching in my throat as I looked up at Julian. Julian nodded gravely, confirming my darkest thought. Yes. For the past 6 months, I had been diligently wiring $12,000 a month to my mother, completely believing her hysterical lies about a sudden foreclosure and a church investment gone wrong. I thought I was acting as the dutiful, successful daughter stepping up to save my family from homelessness. But the forensic audit laid the brutal reality bare. The monthly payment on the $500,000 mansion was roughly $4,000. The minimum monthly payments and compounding interest on Darius' defaulted business loans amounted to exactly $8,000. The $12,000 was not an allowance. It was not a gift to help the family. My mother was forcing me to pay the mortgage and the interest on the fraudulent loans she had illegally taken out in my own name. I had been paying my own stolen debt. The sheer, diabolical genius of her extortion scheme left me breathless. This was why she had been so confident, so utterly ruthless during that phone call when she threatened to expose me for wire fraud. She was not just throwing random legal terms around to scare me. She was pointing out a loaded trap that she had forced me to step into. By tricking me into wiring money to cover those specific loans from my corporate consulting accounts, she had successfully tied my legitimate business to her illegal activity. If I stopped sending the $12,000, the mortgage on the mansion would immediately go into default. The commercial loans Darius had squandered would default. Because all of these massive debts were legally registered under my Social Security number, the defaults would instantly trigger a catastrophic financial collapse directly on my head. My immaculate credit score would be obliterated overnight. My corporate consulting licenses which required pristine financial standing and rigorous background checks, would be revoked. The elite luxury clients who trusted my agency to manage their multi-million-dollar events would flee the moment they saw my name attached to a massive financial scandal. My mother had engineered a perfect, inescapable hostage situation. If I paid her, she and Darius continued to live like royalty on my dime. If I cut them off, my entire empire would burn to the ground, and she would stand in the ashes playing the victim, claiming I had ruined the family name with my irresponsible financial crimes. She had weaponized my love, my ambition, and my very identity. I closed the heavy leather binder. The soft thud echoed in the silent kitchen, sounding like a judge gavel coming down on a final sentence. The intense, suffocating pain of the betrayal that had paralyzed me just moments ago suddenly evaporated. The hot tears that had threatened to spill from my eyes completely dried up, replaced by a cold, calculated, and absolute fury. The girl who had spent her entire life trying to earn her mother approval, the sister who had silently endured endless mockery just to keep the peace, died right there at that kitchen island. In her place stood the chief executive officer who had built a corporate powerhouse from nothing. I felt a glacial calm settle over my mind, sharpening my focus until every detail of my mother deception was illuminated with terrifying clarity. They did not just view me as a cash cow. They viewed me as a disposable asset, a sacrificial lamb they were completely willing to slaughter on the altar of their own greed. Julian watched the transformation happen. He saw the exact moment the grief left my eyes, replaced by the ruthless determination he knew so well from our own corporate battles. He leaned against the marble counter, his arms crossed over his chest, his demeanor shifting to match my own cold resolve. "We have everything we need," Julian said quietly, gesturing to the binder. "The forensic audit is airtight. We have the IP addresses used to submit the loan applications, which trace directly back to your mother home computer. We have the fraudulent signatures perfectly analyzed. We have the bank routing numbers showing exactly where the funds were dispersed to Darius. I can have my legal team draft the criminal complaint in an hour. We can hand this entire dossier over to the federal authorities and the Atlanta police by the end of the day. They will be arrested for identity theft and federal wire fraud before the sun goes down." He paused, watching my face carefully. "Do you want me to make the call, Maya? Do you want to call the police?" I rested my hands on the cool leather of the binder, feeling the weight of the evidence beneath my palms. I thought about my mother standing in her expensive emerald dress, publicly humiliating me at the Thanksgiving table. I thought about Darius smashing my hard-earned business award and demanding a luxury vehicle while complaining about the essays I was forced to write for him. I thought about Keisha parading around with a Himalayan crocodile bag funded by my stolen identity, posting smug quotes about family loyalty on the internet. Calling the police would be swift. It would be legally devastating, but it lacked the poetic justice my soul suddenly craved with a burning intensity. If the authorities simply showed up at their door and arrested them, my mother would instantly spin the narrative. She would cry to Pastor Thomas. She would play the victim to the entire congregation, claiming the system was tearing a successful Black family apart. She would find a way to make herself a martyr, and my reputation would still suffer in the crossfire of the scandal. I looked up at my husband, my eyes locked onto his, completely devoid of any remaining familial affection or mercy. "No," I said, my voice steady, smooth, and lethal. "Handing them over to the police right now is entirely too easy. If they go to jail today, they will just sit in a cell and convince themselves they are victims of a misunderstanding." Julian raised an eyebrow, a slow, predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. He recognized the tone. He knew exactly what I was doing. "Then what is the directive, Maya?" I stepped away from the kitchen island, my mind already mapping out the intricate architecture of their absolute destruction. "I want to dismantle their entire reality," I stated, pacing slowly across the hardwood floor. "They value their social status above everything else. My mother lives for the admiration of her church friends. Darius needs everyone to believe he is a brilliant entrepreneur. Keisha breathes for the envy of other women. Their entire existence is built on the illusion of elite wealth and superiority. They thrive on maintaining that perfect public facade. I turned back to Julian, my plan crystallizing into a flawless, inescapable trap. I do not just want to send them to prison, Julian. I want to strip them of their pride, their assets, and their dignity in front of the exact same audience they used to humiliate me. I want to take away the mansion, the cars, the designer bags, and the fake legacy they built on my back. I want to publicly execute their reputation so thoroughly that they can never show their faces in Atlanta society again. Julian stepped forward, closing the distance between us. He reached out, gently tilting my chin up so I was looking directly into his dark, calculating eyes. The venture capitalist who thrived on hostile takeovers was fully activated, ready to burn their world to the ground at my command. "Tell me what you need," he whispered fiercely. "My legal team, my security, my capital. Whatever it takes to break them, it is yours." "We are going to play into their greed," I explained, the strategy forming rapidly. "My mother and Darius are addicted to easy money. They feel entitled to it. We are going to offer them a deal so incredibly lucrative, so wildly extravagant, that they will be completely blinded by their own arrogance. They will willingly walk right into a trap because they believe I am too weak to fight back, and they believe you are too rich to care about the missing funds." I picked up my mobile phone, looking at the blocked numbers and the muted notifications from Keisha's toxic social media posts. We are going to give them the grandest stage they have ever seen. We are going to let them put on their best clothes, invite all their prestigious friends, and stand in the spotlight they crave so desperately. And right when they think they have won, right when they think they have successfully secured their stolen empire forever, I am going to pull the floor out from underneath them entirely. I tapped the bright screen, unblocking my mother phone number. The time for hiding in silence was over. The time for running from the emotional manipulation and extortion was completely done. I want to take everything they love first. I vowed, hitting the call button and holding the phone to my ear, listening to the dial tone ring out. And then I'm going to let the authorities pick up the pieces of whatever is left. Before the first ring could even echo through the speaker, Julian reached across the marble island and pressed his finger against the red end call button on my screen. The line went dead instantly. I looked up at him, startled by the sudden interruption of my momentum. He was not looking at me. His dark eyes were fixed on the very last tab of the forensic accounting dossier, which he had just flipped open. "Wait, Maya," Julian instructed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You need to see this final section before you speak to her. You need to understand exactly who we are dealing with, because your mother and your brother are not the only architects of this nightmare." I pulled the heavy leather binder closer to me, staring at the freshly exposed pages. The documents in this section were not mortgage applications or commercial business loans. They were intricate LLC formation papers, corporate banking records, and high-limit credit card statements. I scanned the highlighted names on the official banking headers and felt my stomach drop all over again. The primary account holder was listed as Maya, but the authorized signer and sole cardholder was Keisha. My sister-in-law was not just a vapid socialite blindly spending the money my mother stole. She was a highly active, calculating participant in the entire criminal conspiracy. The forensic accountants had tracked every single luxury purchase Keisha loved to flaunt on social media directly back to my stolen identity. That Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag she had proudly placed on my mother's dining chair at Thanksgiving was purchased using a platinum credit card, opened fraudulently under my consulting firm name. Her extravagant luxury baby shower, the one she had posted hundreds of pictures of online, complete with an ice sculpture and celebrity caterers, had been entirely funded by a line of credit opened against my pristine credit score. She had been living the ultimate fantasy life, literally swiping my stolen identity at the register of every high-end boutique in Atlanta. But the sheer depth of Keisha's greed went far beyond simple retail therapy. Julian pointed to a complex web of wire transfers highlighted in neon yellow ink. "Look at where the bulk of the stolen cash was routed," Julian explained, tracing the path of the money with his pen. "Your mother and Darius knew that Darius' commercial loans were going to default eventually. They knew creditors would start hunting for assets to seize. So they proactively started hiding the cash. They systematically funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into a shell company named Buckhead Royalty Holdings. I looked at the corporate registration documents for the shell company. The sole proprietor and managing director of Buckhead Royalty Holdings was Keisha. They had deliberately parked the stolen assets in a fake corporate entity owned entirely by my sister-in-law to shield the money from the inevitable financial fallout they planned to dump squarely on my shoulders. Keisha had eagerly provided her name to launder the stolen funds, securing her own wealthy future while actively participating in my absolute financial destruction. They are a literal crime syndicate, I whispered, feeling a renewed surge of absolute disgust for the people I once called family. They sit in the front pews of Pastor Thomas' church every Sunday singing hymns and quoting scripture, and then they come home to launder stolen money through fake corporations. Exactly, Julian said, closing the binder with a resounding snap. Which is why a simple police raid is not enough. If we just call the authorities right now, Keisha will immediately wire those hidden funds to offshore accounts. Your mother will claim she was confused by the banking paperwork. Darius will play dumb. We need to trap them in a corner they cannot squirm out of. We need them to voluntarily hand over every single dime they stole, and we are going to use their own colossal egos to make them do it. Within the hour, Julian summoned his elite team of corporate litigators to our home. 3 sharp-suited attorneys arrived carrying briefcases filled with specialized legal traps. We convened in our expansive living room, spreading the forensic audit documents across the glass coffee table. Julian-led attorney, a ruthless legal strategist named Harrison, reviewed the evidence and immediately understood the assignment. We cannot force them to repay the stolen funds without a lengthy, highly public court battle, Harrison explained, adjusting his glasses. But if we play this right, we can make them willingly surrender the assets. We just need to offer them a prize so irresistibly massive that they completely abandon their basic common sense. We draft a document that looks exactly like a golden ticket, but operates entirely like a legal guillotine. Julian leaned back in his armchair, his mind actively constructing the master plan. Your family is obsessed with status Maya. They are addicted to the illusion of being elite black royalty in Atlanta. They want the wealth, but more importantly, they want the public recognition of that wealth. We are going to give them the ultimate status symbol. We are going to offer them a generational wealth family trust. The brilliance of the strategy hit me instantly. In our social circles, nothing commanded more respect and envy than a formal family trust. It was the ultimate indicator that a family had transitioned from new money to established elite royalty. We tell them we are establishing an irrevocable trust worth $2 million. I said, the plan forming perfectly in my mind. We make my mother and Darius the primary beneficiaries. We tell them it is designed to secure the family legacy and provide for Keisha's unborn child. They will be so utterly blinded by the promise of $2 million that they will not even question the mechanics of the paperwork. Precisely, Julian agreed, a dark smile playing on his lips. But those documents will not be a trust fund. Harrison and his team will draft a legally binding confession of identity theft and wire fraud perfectly disguised under pages of heavy, dense corporate legalese. Buried in the documents will be a voluntary asset forfeiture agreement. By signing the papers, they will be legally admitting to the $500,000 fraud and voluntarily surrendering the suburban mansion, Darius vehicles, and the entire contents of Keisha Shell Company directly to your corporation as restitution. It was a lethal, flawless trap. They would literally sign their own criminal confessions and hand back every stolen asset while believing they were securing a multi-million-dollar fortune. But to make them swallow the bait, I needed to play the role of the broken, submissive daughter one last time. I needed to convince my mother that her psychological manipulation had worked and that I was completely surrendering to her dominance. I picked up my mobile phone, clearing my throat and forcing my facial features into a mask of pure distress. I practiced keeping my voice shaky, unstable, and laced with heavy guilt. Julian and the lawyers watched in silent anticipation as I dialed my mother number. This time it rang only twice before she answered. "What do you want?" "Maya." My mother snapped, her tone cold and imperious. "Have you called to disrespect me again?" I took a sharp, shuddering breath, forcing a sob into my throat. "Mom," I whimpered, my voice cracking perfectly. "Mom, I am so sorry." There was a brief, surprised silence on the other end of the line. The sheer suddenness of my surrender clearly caught her off guard. I should not have embarrassed Darius like that. I cried, letting actual tears of frustration from earlier fuel my acting performance. "I should not have spoken to you that way at the Thanksgiving table. The guilt is eating me alive, Mom. I know how much you sacrificed for me. I know I owe my success to your prayers and your guidance. I understand my duty to this family, and I was wrong to turn my back on you." I could practically hear the smug, arrogant grin spreading across my mother's face. Her narcissism was a bottomless pit, and I was feeding it exactly what it craved. She genuinely believed her threat to ruin my reputation at the church had terrified me into total submission. "I knew you would see the light eventually, Maya," she said, her voice dripping with triumphant condescension. "You are a smart girl, but you let that rich husband of yours put ideas of independence in your head. Family comes first, Maya. We are all you really have in this world. I am glad you have finally remembered your proper place." Now about the $25,000 a month. I forced another loud, convincing sniffle. "We want to do something much better than a monthly allowance, Mom." Julian feels terrible. He knows he stepped out of line when he challenged you at the dinner table. He respects you as the matriarch of this family, and he wants to make things right permanently. My mother's tone shifted from arrogant to highly intrigued. "Make things right how exactly?" I took a deep breath, delivering the ultimate hook. "Julian wants to establish an irrevocable, generational wealth family trust. He is allocating $2 million into the fund. You and Darius will be the primary beneficiaries, and it will secure Keisha baby future forever. He wants to elevate the family name exactly like you asked. It will make you the wealthiest matriarch in our entire church congregation." The silence on the line was absolutely deafening. I could hear her rapid breathing as the magnitude of the number echoed in her greedy mind. $2 million. It was a sum of money she could barely comprehend, an amount that would guarantee her supreme social dominance in Atlanta forever. Her ego simply could not resist it. She swallowed the bait whole. "A family trust," my mother breathed, her voice trembling with raw, unadulterated greed. $2 million. Well, it is about time Julian stepped up and proved his worth to this family. This is exactly what I have been praying for, Maya. This is how we build our legacy. I smiled, a chilling, predatory smile that she could not see. "Yes, Mom," I said softly. "We are going to build a legacy you will never ever forget." The moment the line disconnected, Julian and I stood in the kitchen and allowed a cold, calculating silence to settle over the room. We had just dangled the ultimate prize in front of a woman whose entire existence was fueled by vanity. Now all we had to do was wait for her ego to demand an audience. It did not even take 24 hours. The very next morning, my phone rang. While Julian and I were reviewing the finalized trap documents with Harrison and the legal team, it was my mother. I answered the call and immediately placed the device in the center of the glass coffee table so everyone in the room could hear the sheer entitlement dripping from her voice. "Maya!" My mother began, her tone entirely stripped of the fake emotional distress from yesterday. "I have been thinking very carefully about this generational wealth family trust Julian is establishing. I have been praying on it, and the Lord has placed it heavily on my heart that a blessing of this magnitude cannot simply be signed in some dusty downtown law office." I glanced at Julian. He raised a single eyebrow, waiting for the inevitable demand. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly compliant. "We need to host a formal signing gala," my mother declared, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "We are establishing Black excellence, Maya. We are showing the entire city of Atlanta what it looks like when a family truly elevates their legacy. I want to host a black tie event at a 5-star hotel in Buckhead. I want gold embossed invitations. I want champagne towers. I want to invite Pastor Thomas, the entire deacon board, and all the prominent families in our congregation. They need to witness this historic moment. They need to see how Julian is honoring the matriarch of this family." She was not just asking for a party, she was demanding a coronation. She wanted to stand on a literal stage and force every single woman in her social circle who had ever doubted her or competed with her to watch her receive $2 million. Her narcissism was a bottomless void, and she was throwing herself headfirst into the abyss. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He pitched his voice to sound perfectly hesitant, playing the role of the reluctant but ultimately submissive wealthy son-in-law. Mother Yvonne, Julian said, sounding deliberately uncomfortable. $2 million is a highly sensitive financial transition. Usually, high-net-worth families prefer to keep these asset transfers strictly confidential. Moving this kind of capital requires discretion. A massive public gala seems like a security risk. I watched Julian deliver the performance of a lifetime. By telling a narcissist to be discreet, he was virtually guaranteeing she would demand a spectacle. Discretion is for people who have something to hide. My mother scoffed, her arrogance inflating to astronomical proportions. We are black royalty in this city, Julian. We do not hide our blessings in boardrooms. We celebrate them publicly to inspire the community. This is about setting an example. If you respect me and if you respect this family, you will give us the platform we deserve. I will not accept the trust in secret like some shameful handout. It happens in public or it does not happen at all. Julian let a heavy, defeated sigh escape his lips perfectly, mimicking a man who realized he could not win the argument. You make a strong point, Mother Yvonne. Julian conceded, his tone resigned. If a public celebration is what it takes to mend this family and move forward, then I will fund it. You pick the venue in Buckhead. Send the invoices directly to my executive assistant. Invite whoever you want. We will do this your way. My mother let out a triumphant laugh, the sound grating against my ears. I knew you were a smart man, Julian. I will start the preparations immediately. We will aim for next Saturday night. Do not worry about a thing. I will make sure this family looks like absolute perfection. She ended the call riding the ultimate high of perceived victory. Harrison, the lead attorney, slowly closed his legal pad, a sharp, predatory smile forming on his face. She just invited her entire social circle to watch her sign a federal criminal confession, Harrison noted, adjusting his glasses. The psychological profile you provided was flawlessly accurate, Maya. With the blank check Julian had seemingly provided, my mother went into absolute overdrive. The illusion of victory spread through my toxic family like wildfire, completely blinding them to reality. My mother booked the grand ballroom at one of the most prestigious and fiercely expensive luxury hotels in the heart of Buckhead. She ordered massive floral arrangements, imported crystal centerpieces, and a custom-catered menu that rivaled a royal banquet. She sent out over 150 urgent digital invitations to the absolute upper echelon of the Atlanta Black elite. She made absolutely certain to invite every single church member she considered a rival. She wanted the women who normally bragged about their own children to sit in the front row and watch her son become an overnight millionaire. Darius, meanwhile, completely lost his grip on reality. Convinced that the $2 million trust was actually validation of his imaginary genius, he began acting like a Silicon Valley tech mogul. He spent his days holding court at expensive cigar lounges in Midtown, buying $1,000 bottles of vintage champagne for anyone who would listen to him brag. He told his deadbeat friends that he had finally secured major venture capital backing from my husband. He confidently promised them executive positions in his non-existent app company, boasting that he was about to revolutionize the tech industry. He strutted through the city with the unearned swagger of a man who believed he had outsmarted the entire system. He genuinely thought he had broken me down and forced my wealthy husband to finance his extravagant delusions. But the most spectacularly ironic display of greed came from Keisha. Desperate to be the undisputed star of the upcoming gala, Keisha decided she needed a wardrobe that reflected her new impending billionaire status. She could not simply buy a dress off the rack. She needed custom couture. Sitting in my home office, Julian and I opened my laptop and pulled up the live transaction alerts for the fraudulent platinum credit card Keisha had opened under my stolen identity. We watched in absolute silence as the notifications began to roll in one after another, painting a vivid picture of her grotesque shopping spree. A charge for $4,000 at a VIP bridal and couture boutique in Phipps Plaza flashed on the screen. Keisha was buying a custom-tailored maternity evening gown. An hour later, a charge for $1,200 at a high-end shoe retailer popped up. By the afternoon, another notification for $3,000 at a luxury jeweler confirmed she was dripping herself in diamonds for the big night. "Should we decline the charges?" Julian asked, taking a slow sip of his bourbon, his eyes locked on the glowing computer screen. "I can have the bank freeze the card right now." I shook my head, a cold, satisfying warmth spreading through my chest. "No," I said, watching a final charge for an $800 professional makeup booking appear on the ledger. "Let the charges clear, Julian. Let her buy every single luxurious item she desires. Let her wrap herself in stolen money." "Why?" Harrison asked, looking up from his legal briefs. "Because every time she swipes that card, she is adding another count of federal wire fraud to the evidence file." I explained, tracing the edge of my coffee mug. "She is documenting her own crimes in real time. Besides, I want her to look absolutely flawless when the federal agents put the handcuffs on her. I want her to be wearing that $4,000 custom gown when she realizes she is entirely homeless. Let her have her moment of glory. It will make the fall so much more devastating." The villains of my story were completely wrapped in a warm, comfortable blanket of their own making. They were celebrating a victory they had not actually won, spending money they did not actually own, and inviting their entire world to witness their triumph. They thought they had backed me into a corner, forcing me to surrender my wealth to protect my peace. They believed my silence over the past few days was the silence of a defeated, broken woman. They had absolutely no idea that the silent peace they were enjoying was simply the water receding from the shoreline right before a massive, catastrophic tsunami hits. As the days ticked down to the grand gala, the preparations reached a fever pitch. My mother called my assistant a dozen times a day, demanding upgrades to the hotel menu, adding more expensive champagne to the bar, and insisting on a red carpet entrance for the guests. My assistant, acting on Julian's strict orders, approved every single ridiculous demand without a single word of pushback. I spent the week meticulously preparing my own presentation. I gathered the high-definition scans of the forged mortgage documents. I pulled the undeniable banking trails showing the money flowing into Keisha Fake, LLC. I took the security footage of Darius' violent tantrum in my office and had it digitally enhanced for maximum clarity on a massive projector screen. I was not just preparing to cut off my family financially, I was preparing to surgically remove them from civil society. I was going to strip away the elegant church-going masks they wore and expose the greedy, parasitic reality underneath. On the morning of the gala, Julian stood in front of his full-length mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke tuxedo. I sat on the edge of our bed watching him wearing a sleek, sophisticated black evening gown that felt like beautiful armor. "Are you ready for this?" Julian asked, turning to look at me, his dark eyes filled with absolute unwavering support. "Once we walk into that ballroom tonight, there is no turning back. You are going to detonate a bomb in the middle of your own family." I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I thought about the years of emotional abuse. I thought about the $12,000 they stole from me every month. I thought about my mother demanding I sacrifice my life for a brother who despised me. "I am ready," I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. "They wanted a public spectacle, Julian. Tonight we are going to give them exactly what they asked for." We did not head straight to the Buckhead Hotel. Instead, our chauffeured car brought us directly to the underground parking garage of Julian corporate headquarters. We took the private elevator up to his executive boardroom, where Harrison and his team of elite litigators were waiting for our final approval. The room smelled of rich mahogany and freshly brewed espresso, a sharp contrast to the chaotic emotional warfare of my family. Spread out across the center of the massive glass conference table was the physical manifestation of our vengeance. At first glance, the documents looked exactly like the key to an empire. Harrison had spared absolutely no expense in creating the perfect optical illusion. The paperwork was printed on heavy cream-colored archival paper bound in genuine leather portfolios and stamped with glittering gold foil seals. The cover page read, "Generational Wealth Family Trust" in elegant sweeping calligraphy. It looked expensive. It looked official. It looked exactly like the kind of status symbol my mother and brother would sell their souls to acquire. Harrison stood at the head of the table adjusting his silver-framed glasses. "The psychological profile you provided for the targets dictated our formatting strategy, Maya," he explained, tapping the leather cover. "People who are obsessed with the appearance of wealth rarely possess the patience or the intellect to actually read the fine print." We placed all the glamorous terminology on the first 3 pages. Words like irrevocable beneficiary and multi-million-dollar asset allocation are highlighted in bold. By the time they reach page 4, their egos will be so incredibly inflated they will sign anything we put in front of them without a single second thought. I reached out and opened the binder, tracing the heavy text with my fingertips. "And the actual mechanisms of the trap," I asked, looking up at the legal team. Harrison flipped to the middle of the document, his predatory smile returning. Hidden within the labyrinth of dense corporate legalese, starting precisely at section 4.2, the document completely sheds the nature of a trust. It legally transitions into a fully binding confession of identity theft and federal wire fraud, perfectly paired with a voluntary asset forfeiture agreement. He pointed to a highly specific paragraph buried under a mountain of financial jargon. "Right here, your mother Yvonne explicitly admits to illegally utilizing your social security number 10 years ago. She confesses to securing the $500,000 mortgage for her suburban mansion under false pretenses. She also admits to securing the commercial loans for Darius. We embedded specific clauses acknowledging her premeditated intent to defraud your consulting firm to make the eventual criminal prosecution completely seamless for the federal authorities." Julian leaned over my shoulder reading the text. "And the restitution clause," Julian prompted. "Airtight," Harrison confirmed. "Section 5 details the voluntary forfeiture. By signing this document, Yvonne legally surrenders the deed to the suburban mansion directly to Maya Corporate Holding Company. Darius surrenders the titles to his luxury vehicles. And crucially, Keisha signs over full administrative control and all liquid assets currently parked inside her fake shell company, Buckhead Royalty Holdings. They are willingly transferring every single stolen dime back to you, Maya. And because we are having these documents signed in front of 2 state-licensed public notaries tonight, they cannot claim coercion or ignorance. The moment the ink dries, they are legally destitute." I stared at the pristine pages, feeling a profound sense of closure wrapping around my heart. For 32 years, my mother had manipulated the narrative. She had painted herself as the flawless praying matriarch while casting me as the difficult, ungrateful daughter. Tonight, her own signature would permanently rewrite that history. She was going to document her own villainy in front of the exact audience she wanted to impress. The sheer poetic justice of her hubris, being the very instrument of her destruction, was immensely satisfying. While Julian and Harrison discussed the final notarization protocols, I stepped away from the conference table and walked over to the massive digital display screen mounted on the far wall. I needed to ground myself. I needed to look at the undeniable proof of their hostility one last time to ensure not a single ounce of familial guilt remained in my system. I picked up the remote and activated the screen. High-definition blow-ups of the forged mortgage applications illuminated the room. I stared at the crude imitation of my signature. It was a sloppy, hasty forgery, executed by a woman who believed I was too naive to ever check my own credit history. She had bound me to $500,000 of debt with a few strokes of a pen, never once caring about the crushing financial burden she was placing on my future. I examined the commercial loan paperwork Darius had submitted using my stolen identity. It was a masterclass in financial parasitism. I switched the display to the security footage from my office. The high-resolution video played in complete silence, but the sheer violence of the act resonated through the boardroom. I watched Darius, a grown man, throwing a catastrophic temper tantrum. I watched his face contort with unearned rage as he picked up the heavy acrylic display stand and hurled it across my sanctuary. I watched my beautiful hard-earned business award shatter into 1,000 glittering pieces on the carpet. I watched Keisha standing beside him screaming demands and acting as his arrogant accomplice. They looked like absolute monsters. They looked like strangers. Any lingering hesitation in my spirit vanished entirely. These people were not my family. They were a hostile, occupying force that had fed on my energy and my finances for decades. I was not destroying them. I was simply holding up a mirror and forcing them to face their own reflection. They had pushed me to the absolute edge, and now they were going to plummet over it. "You ready?" Julian asked, stepping up beside me and looking at the frozen frame of Darius mid-throw on the digital screen. I turned off the display, plunging the room back into elegant stillness. "I have never been more ready for anything in my entire life," I replied. "Are the authorities in place?" Julian checked his platinum wristwatch, the custom timepiece gleaming under the boardroom lights. He pulled his mobile phone from his inner jacket pocket and dialed a secure number. He put the call on speaker so I could hear the coordination. The man who answered possessed a sharp, authoritative voice that commanded immediate respect. "Agent Reynolds," Julian said smoothly. "I am confirming our timeline for tonight." "We are fully locked and loaded," Julian, the federal agent, responded. Reynolds was a senior investigator with the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. Julian had connected with him years ago during a complex corporate embezzlement case, and they had maintained a highly effective professional relationship ever since. "I have reviewed the preliminary forensic audit your Chicago team forwarded over this morning. The scale of the identity theft is substantial. We have local Atlanta Police Department units on standby to assist with the physical arrests and crowd control. My mother booked the grand ballroom at the luxury hotel in Buckhead," Julian confirmed, leaning against the conference table. "The signing ceremony is scheduled for exactly 9 o'clock. We will need your teams positioned at the perimeter by 8:45. "Understood," Reynolds replied, his tone strictly business. "We will stage plainclothes officers in the hotel lobby and position marked units at the loading dock exits to prevent anyone from slipping out through the service elevators. Once the targets sign the confession documents and the notaries stamp them, you give the signal. We will move in, secure the perimeter of the ballroom, and execute the arrest warrants for Yvonne and Darius on federal wire fraud and identity theft charges. We will also detain Keisha for questioning regarding her role in managing the fraudulent shell company." "Perfect," Julian said, a dangerous smile playing on his lips. "We will see you tonight, Reynolds." Julian ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The final pieces of the board were officially set. The legal trap was flawless. The visual evidence was queued up and ready for deployment. The federal authorities were briefed and mobilized. There was absolutely no avenue of escape left for my mother or my brother. They were walking blindly into a meticulously designed ambush. Harrison carefully packed the Trojan horse documents back into their luxurious leather binders, handling them with the reverence of a loaded weapon. He handed the primary binder to Julian, ensuring the gold seals faced outward for maximum visual impact. "The notaries are already en route to the venue," Maya Harrison said, adjusting his tie. "They have been briefed to look completely natural. To your mother, they will just look like high-end corporate assistants facilitating a wealthy transaction. They will verify the identities, witness the signatures, and apply their state seals, sealing the trap shut." "Thank you, Harrison," I said, shaking the lawyer hand. "For everything. Just doing my job," Harrison replied with a polite nod. "Give them hell tonight." Julian offered me his arm, and I took it, wrapping my fingers securely around his bicep. We walked out of the boardroom and stepped into the private elevator. As the stainless steel doors closed, sealing us in, Julian looked down at me, his expression filled with absolute devotion and fierce pride. "Tonight we cut the anchor, Maya," Julian whispered, kissing my forehead gently. "Tonight you drop the black tax forever. You are walking out of that ballroom a completely free woman." I leaned my head against his shoulder, watching the floor numbers descend on the digital display. I thought about the extravagant gala my mother was currently hosting. I pictured the crystal chandeliers, the champagne, the 150 elite guests she had invited to witness her triumph. She wanted to show the entire city of Atlanta that she had conquered her rebellious daughter and secured her golden child future. She wanted a spectacle. And I was going to give her a show that Buckhead society would talk about for the next 50 years. The elevator chimed, arriving at the underground parking garage where our driver was waiting with the engine running. We stepped into the cool, dimly lit space, the heavy air buzzing with anticipation. I took one last deep breath, letting go of the scared, insecure girl who had paid her mother debts out of misguided guilt. "Let us go to the gala," I said, sliding into the back seat of the luxury sedan. "It is time to let them sign their lives away." The drive from Julian corporate headquarters to the luxury hotel in Buckhead took less than 20 minutes, but the transition between those two worlds felt like crossing into an alternate dimension of pure, unadulterated vanity. We pulled up to the grand entrance of the five-star estate, where a fleet of valet attendants was busy rushing to park an endless stream of luxury vehicles. My mother had spared absolutely no expense for her night of glory. A literal red carpet had been rolled out across the cobblestone driveway flanked by velvet ropes, and a hired photographer snapping pictures of the arriving guests. It was a grotesque display of manufactured celebrity. We stepped out of our sedan and made our way through the gilded lobby toward the main ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors were propped wide open, guarded by hotel staff holding embossed guest lists. As Julian and I crossed the threshold, the sheer scale of the extravagance hit me like a physical wave. My mother had transformed the massive space into a palace of gold and ivory. Towering crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, glittering glow over dozens of round tables draped in imported silk linens. At the center of each table sat towering floral arrangements of white orchids and rare lilies that must have cost a small fortune to procure. A string quartet was positioned in the corner of the room, elegantly playing classical renditions of modern rhythm and blues hits. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated seamlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of premium vintage champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. It was the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society, and every single detail was funded by Julian Open checkbook, specifically designed to inflate my mother ego until it burst. I scanned the crowded room, immediately locating the architect of this circus. My mother was standing near the center of the ballroom, holding court like a reigning monarch. She wore a breathtaking floor-length silver gown, dripping with intricate beadwork that caught the light with her every movement. Her hair was styled to absolute perfection, and a heavy diamond necklace rested against her collarbone. She was surrounded by the most elite members of our church congregation, soaking up their undivided attention. I saw Pastor Thomas standing next to her, nodding reverently as she spoke. Beside him were the lead deacons and the wealthy wives who ran the church social committees. These were the exact same women who used to whisper behind their hands about our family when my mother was just a struggling single parent. Now they were hanging on to her every word, laughing at her jokes, and staring at her diamond necklace with barely concealed envy. My mother was completely intoxicated by the adulation. She was breathing in the validation she had chased her entire life. Not too far from the matriarch, Darius and Keisha were putting on a spectacular performance of their own. Darius was holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquor, gesturing expansively with his free hand as he spoke to a group of successful local businessmen. He was wearing a custom-tailored velvet smoking jacket, acting exactly like a Silicon Valley billionaire who had just taken his tech company public. I could practically hear him bragging about his imaginary venture capital backing and his non-existent app development. He was selling them a total fantasy, and they were nodding politely, completely unaware that the man speaking to them was a fraud, who could not even qualify for a basic car loan without my stolen identity. Keisha was parading through the ballroom, making absolutely certain that every woman in attendance got a good look at her. She was wearing the exact $4,000 custom maternity gown we had seen on the credit card alert just days ago. The fabric draped perfectly over her pregnant belly, making her look like a glowing, wealthy heiress. She clutched a glass of sparkling cider in one hand and her stolen Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag in the other, holding the purse up high so the gold hardware was visible from across the room. She was living her absolute best life, completely oblivious to the fact that she was parading around in evidence of federal wire fraud. Julian placed a warm, steady hand on my lower back, guiding me into the crowd. We had deliberately chosen to dress impeccably, but with severe, understated elegance. I wore a sleek, tailored black evening gown, with sharp architectural lines devoid of any flashy sequins or oversized jewels. Julian wore his classic charcoal tuxedo, exuding quiet, authentic power, rather than loud, desperate new money. We were not there to compete for attention. We were the executioners arriving in uniform. As we navigated through the sea of guests, my mother finally spotted us. Her eyes lit up with predatory triumph. She excused herself from Pastor Thomas and practically glided across the polished marble floor to greet us. Her smile was blindingly bright, but her eyes were cold and calculating as they locked onto mine. "Maya Julian," my mother said, projecting her voice just loud enough for the nearby church members to hear. "You look wonderful. I am so glad you arrived before the dinner service begins. The ballroom looks absolutely magnificent, does it not?" "It is certainly unforgettable," Mother Yvonne Julienne replied smoothly, his tone perfectly respectful. "You have outdone yourself tonight. The arrangements are flawless." My mother preened under the compliment, adjusting her diamond necklace. She stepped closer to me, invading my personal space under the guise of an affectionate maternal embrace. She leaned in, pressing her cheek against mine, and whispered directly into my ear, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous hiss, meant only for me. "See, Maya," she whispered, her breath hot against my neck. "This is how you respect your bloodline. This is what happens when you remember your proper place and submit to the family hierarchy. Look around this room. Everyone who matters is here to witness your husband honoring me. You thought you could cut me off and walk away, but I broke you. You are paying for all of this, and you are going to smile while you do it. Do not ever try to challenge my authority again." She pulled back, smoothing the fabric of my black dress with a patronizing pat. I looked directly into her eyes and let a slow, chilling, empty smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile that did not reach my eyes, a mask of absolute glacial calm. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice soft and perfectly level. "Tonight is all about honoring the truth of our bloodline. Everyone who matters is here to witness exactly what you deserve. I promise you, this is a night you will remember for the rest of your life." My mother smirked, completely misinterpreting my lethal calm as total defeat. She turned and gestured for us to follow her to the head table, positioned right in front of the elevated stage. The table was reserved for the immediate family, and Pastor Thomas ensuring we were seated in the direct center of the spectacle. As the string quartet finished their set, the hotel catering staff smoothly transitioned the room into the dinner service. Waiters poured vintage wine and served plates of filet mignon and butter-poached lobster tail. The clinking of heavy silver cutlery against fine china filled the massive ballroom. Darius and Keisha took their seats across from us. Keisha shot me a smug, victorious look, gently resting her hand on her pregnant belly, while Darius lifted his glass to Julian in a mock salute. Julian simply nodded back, his hand resting casually on the thick leather binder he had placed on the table next to his plate. When the dinner plates were finally cleared away, the ambient lighting in the ballroom dimmed. A single bright spotlight illuminated the elevated stage at the front of the room. The chatter died down as my mother gracefully rose from her seat at our table and walked up the carpeted steps to the microphone stand. She stood in the spotlight, looking out over the sea of 150 elite guests. She gripped the sides of the acrylic podium, taking a deep, dramatic breath. When she spoke, her voice trembled with perfectly manufactured emotion echoing through the silent room. "Family, friends, and esteemed guests." My mother began projecting a tone of profound humility that made my stomach churn. "Thank you all for gathering here tonight to share in this tremendous blessing. When I look out at all of your beautiful faces, I am overwhelmed by the grace of God and the undeniable power of Black generational wealth." A chorus of affirmative murmurs and polite applause rippled through the audience, Pastor Thomas nodded vigorously from his seat beside me. Many of you know my story. My mother continued, wiping an imaginary tear from the corner of her eye. You know the struggles I faced raising my children as a single mother. You know the long days, the sleepless nights, and the endless sacrifices I made to ensure my son and my daughter had the foundation they needed to succeed in this difficult world. I gave them everything I had. I emptied my own cup so their cups could run over. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the most hypocritical speech I had ever heard in my entire life. She was standing in front of my community, claiming she had sacrificed everything for me, when the reality resting inside Julian Leatherbinder proved she had actively stolen my identity to fund her own vanity. We hear so much negative news about our families, my mother preached, her voice rising with practiced cadence. We hear about division and strife, but tonight is proof of family loyalty. Tonight is proof that when we raise our children right, they return to honor the matriarchs who paved the way. My brilliant son Darius is launching a revolutionary technology venture that will change the industry. My beautiful daughter Maya has built a highly successful consulting firm, and her wonderful husband Julian has decided to establish a $2 million generational wealth family trust to ensure our legacy endures for centuries to come. The ballroom erupted into enthusiastic applause. Women were wiping their eyes, men were nodding in deep respect, and Darius was beaming like a proud king. My mother soaked in the adoration, lifting her hands in a gesture of humble gratitude. She looked down at me from the stage, her eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated arrogance. This trust is not just money, my mother concluded, her voice ringing with triumphant finality. It is a testament to the unbreakable bond of our family. It is the ultimate reward for a mother's unwavering devotion. Thank you, Julian, and thank you, Maya, for finally understanding the true meaning of respect. The applause swelled to a standing ovation. My mother descended the stairs gracefully, returning to our table to the sound of cheering and whistling. She took her seat, smiling brilliantly at Pastor Thomas, who leaned over to congratulate her on a beautiful, moving speech. Julian leaned close to my ear, the applause masking his voice from the rest of the table. The performance is over, Julian whispered, his dark eyes locked on the leather binder resting between us. It is time to drop the curtain. Julian rose from his seat with a smooth, deliberate grace. He picked up the heavy, gold-embossed leather binder from the table, holding it with the reverence one might reserve for a sacred text. The ballroom naturally quieted as he walked up the carpeted steps to the stage, his presence commanding the absolute attention of every single guest in the room. He adjusted the microphone, letting a brief, perfectly timed moment of silence build the anticipation. Thank you all for being here tonight, Julian began, his voice projecting a warm, authoritative resonance that immediately captivated the audience. Family is indeed the cornerstone of any great legacy. When Maya and I discussed how best to honor the matriarch of this family, we knew a simple gesture would not suffice. We needed something monumental, something that truly reflected the depth of Yvonne's sacrifices. He paused, his dark eyes sweeping across the room before locking directly onto my mother. Yvonne has always possessed a very unique financial ingenuity. Julian continued, delivering the lethal double entendre with such a charismatic smile that the entire room chuckled in polite agreement, completely missing the underlying accusation. Her ability to leverage resources, her sheer determination to secure assets for her son Darius, and her relentless drive to build a life of luxury are truly unparalleled. She has orchestrated a financial reality for this family that most people could not even begin to imagine. My mother beamed from her seat, pressing a hand to her chest, utterly oblivious to the fact that Julian was publicly describing her history of federal wire fraud. Pastor Thomas nodded in deep respect, taking Julian's words as a testament to her faith and resourcefulness. The elite society women seated at the adjacent tables murmured their absolute approval, captivated by the grand illusion of our family wealth. Tonight, Julian announced, raising his voice slightly to ride the wave of the audience approval, we are formalizing that reality. We are establishing an irrevocable generational wealth family trust, initially funded with $2 million, to ensure that Yvonne and Darius have exactly the financial future they have worked so tirelessly to secure. I would like to invite Yvonne and Darius to join me on the stage to execute these documents." The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. My mother stood up, smoothing the skirt of her silver gown, looking as though she had just been summoned to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. Darius practically sprinted up the stairs, adjusting his velvet smoking jacket, flashing a $1 million smile to the hired society photographers, who immediately swarmed the base of the stage. The flashbulbs popped in rapid succession, capturing every angle of their triumphant ascent to the very top of the social ladder. Julian gestured to a polished mahogany desk that had been set up on the right side of the stage. Standing behind the desk were two individuals dressed in sharp conservative business attire, holding official leather-bound registry books. To ensure the absolute legal integrity of this transfer, Julian explained to the cheering crowd, "I have brought in two state-licensed public notaries. They will verify the identities, witness the signatures, and apply their official seals to make this trust permanently binding under the full extent of the law." My mother and brother approached the desk like moths drawn to a blinding, lethal flame. The notaries, playing their roles flawlessly, asked for their government-issued identification. My mother proudly handed over her driver license, followed quickly by Darius. The notaries inspected the identification cards, logged the personal details into their official registry books, and nodded to Julian, indicating they were ready to proceed. Julian opened the primary leather binder, laying the thick stack of cream-colored archival paper flat on the desk. He handed a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen directly to my mother. "There are several sections that require both your signature and your initials." Mother Yvonne, Julian said, his voice entirely professional, betraying absolutely no emotion. "The notaries have placed small yellow tabs on every line that requires your authorization. Darius, your designated sections are marked with blue tabs. Please proceed carefully." My mother took the pen, holding it like a royal scepter. She looked out at the audience, soaking in the jealous stares of the church wives and the reverent gaze of Pastor Thomas. She did not look down at the text. She did not read the header of Section 4, which clearly stated voluntary asset forfeiture agreement. She did not read the bold print outlining her full, uncoerced confession of identity theft and wire fraud. Blinded by the flashing camera lights, the intoxicating roar of the crowd, and the overwhelming, ravenous greed for $2 million, she simply flipped to the first yellow tab and signed her name with a sweeping, dramatic flourish. She turned the page and signed again. She initialed the margins exactly where the notary pointed. She signed the page surrendering the deed to the suburban mansion. She signed the page acknowledging the theft of my Social Security number. She signed the page admitting to the fraudulent commercial loans. Her pen glided across the paper with eager, terrifying speed, documenting her own criminal guilt and financial destitution in real time, while she smiled broadly for the cameras. "Yes, Mama, secure the bag!" Keisha shrieked from our table in the front row, cheering the loudest of anyone in the room. Keisha was clapping her hands enthusiastically, her stolen Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag resting proudly on her lap. She was practically vibrating with excitement, entirely unaware that her mother-in-law was currently signing away every single liquid asset parked inside Keisha Fraudulent Shell Company. Darius stepped up next, eagerly snatching the gold pen from his mother hand. He leaned over the desk, puffing out his chest for the photographers, wanting to ensure his status as a new millionaire was properly documented for his social media followers. "Making history tonight," Darius announced to the front row, winking at Keisha before pressing the pen to the paper. He was even faster than my mother. He flipped through the dense corporate legalese without his eyes ever stopping to process a single syllable. He signed away the titles to his luxury vehicles. He signed a formal admission of his complicity in utilizing stolen funds. He initialed the final waiver, stripping him of any right to contest the asset transfer. He was grinning from ear to ear, fully convinced he was cementing his status as a wealthy venture capitalist while legally rendering himself absolutely penniless. "Excellent," Julian said, his voice ringing with a cold, hollow finality that cut through the lingering applause. The two notaries stepped forward to perform their crucial duty. They collected the signed documents, verifying that every single yellow and blue tab had been addressed. With practiced mechanical precision, they pressed their official metal embossed stamps onto the signature pages. The heavy metallic thud of the notary stamps echoed sharply through the microphone, sounding exactly like the closing of a heavy iron vault door, locking a prison cell. The legal trap was officially sprung, verified, and permanently locked. There was no going back. There was no defense of coercion. They had willingly, eagerly, and publicly signed their own financial and criminal death warrants in front of 150 elite witnesses who could easily testify to their enthusiastic participation. Julian carefully gathered the cream-colored pages, aligning the edges with meticulous care. He closed the heavy leather binder, securing the gold clasp. He did not hand a copy to my mother. He did not hand a copy to Darius. They stood waiting expectantly, but Julian simply turned his back to them. Instead, Julian stepped down from the stage, walking directly to the front row, where his lead attorney Harrison was sitting quietly among the guests. Julian handed the binder directly to Harrison. The lawyer immediately slipped the thick portfolio into a reinforced lockable steel briefcase, resting at his feet, snapping the combination locks shut with a sharp, definitive click. The evidence was legally secured beyond their reach. My mother and Darius remained standing on the stage, looking slightly confused as to why they had not been given their copies of the trust, but they quickly masked their uncertainty with broad, practiced smiles as the photographers continued to snap pictures of the newly minted millionaires. Julian casually walked back up the steps and returned to the acrylic podium. The hotel catering staff, anticipating the climax of the ceremony, had silently filed into the ballroom, holding silver trays loaded with freshly poured crystal flutes of premium champagne. They stood at attention around the perimeter of the room, waiting for the signal to distribute the celebratory drinks to the eager guests. The audience settled back into their chairs, a collective hush falling over the ballroom as everyone prepared for the final triumphant toast. Pastor Thomas raised his empty glass in anticipation, waiting for Julian to offer the concluding words of the monumental evening. Everyone was waiting for the final confirmation of my family's ultimate victory over my independence. Instead of calling for the champagne, Julian reached out and tapped the microphone twice. The sharp rhythmic thumps cut through the expectant silence, commanding absolute attention from every single person in the room. "The documents are legally binding," Julian announced, his voice dropping the polite celebratory facade entirely. His tone was now sharp, commanding, and laced with absolute, uncompromising authority. "Now, before we pour the champagne, Maya has a brief presentation about where this family wealth truly comes from." The entire ballroom went incredibly still, sensing the drastic, sudden shift in Julian demeanor. I slowly stood up from my chair in the front row, smoothing my black gown, ready to finally destroy their entire world permanently. I stepped onto the carpeted stairs of the stage and walked purposefully toward the acrylic podium. The rustle of my black evening gown was the only sound in the massive ballroom. I did not look at my mother or my brother. I looked out over the audience of 150 elite guests. These were the people my family worshipped. These were the deacons, the wealthy socialites, the prominent business owners, and the heavily respected members of our church congregation. They stared back at me with expressions of mild confusion, completely unaware that they were about to witness a financial slaughter. Julian handed me the microphone and stepped back, crossing his arms over his chest. He gave a subtle nod to the audio-visual technician stationed at the back of the room. Instantly, the brilliant crystal chandeliers suspended above the ballroom dimmed, plunging the lavish space into a dramatic, shadowy darkness. Gasps of surprise rippled through the seated crowd. The sudden shift in lighting immediately stripped away the warm, celebratory atmosphere, replacing it with the cold, sterile tension of an interrogation room. Behind the stage, the massive 20-foot-wide digital projector screen flickered to life with a sharp hum. My mother had specifically requested that screen, expecting a touching photo montage of our family history to play during dessert. She expected images of her holding me as a baby or pictures of Darius in his high school football uniform. Instead, the screen illuminated the entire ballroom with a stark, blindingly white, high-definition scan of a formal banking document. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice was steady, resonant, and completely devoid of any trembling emotion. It echoed through the dead silent room like a gavel striking a block of solid oak. Take a very close look at the screen behind me, I instructed the audience. What you are looking at is not a symbol of generational wealth. It is a fraudulent mortgage application submitted exactly 10 years ago. It is the original bank document used to secure a $500,000 loan for the very same suburban mansion my mother currently resides in. My mother whipped around to stare at the glowing screen. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking ashen and hollow. Darius stumbled backward, a look of utter horror replacing his arrogant smirk. If you look at the primary applicant information, I continued directing the attention of the crowd. I have highlighted the social security number used to secure this massive line of credit. It is my social security number. But if you look at the date of the application, I was a struggling 19-year-old college student living on instant noodles and working overnight shifts just to afford my textbooks. I did not purchase a $500,000 luxury estate. My mother Yvonne systematically stole my identity and forged my signature to fund her vanity. A collective sharp intake of breath echoed across the ballroom. I watched Pastor Thomas physically recoil in his chair, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief. The church wives who had been showering my mother with praise just minutes ago were now exchanging horrified glances, covering their mouths in shock. But she did not stop at real estate, I stated, clicking a small remote in my hand. The image on the screen changed instantly, displaying a series of commercial loan disclosures. She also used my pristine credit history to take out over $200,000 in corporate business loans. These funds were directly transferred to multiple failed startup companies registered to my brother Darius. The golden child of our family has never earned a single legitimate dollar in his life. Every custom suit he wears, every luxury car he drives, and every business dinner he attends has been entirely funded by federal wire fraud committed in my name. Darius grabbed the edge of the podium, his knuckles turning white. "Shut off that screen," he demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "Turn it off right now, Maya. This is family business." "Family business," I repeated coldly, staring him down. "Family business is exactly what we are discussing, Darius. You wanted the entire city of Atlanta to witness your elevation to billionaire status. Now they get to witness the absolute truth." I clicked the remote again. This time the screen displayed a labyrinth of wire transfers and bank routing numbers, highlighted in neon yellow. I turned my gaze to the front row where Keisha was sitting frozen in her chair. Her hands were clutching her stolen Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag so tightly her manicured fingers were shaking. When Darius inevitably defaulted on those fraudulent loans, my family knew the creditors would come looking for assets, I explained to the captivated, horrified audience. So they decided to proactively hide the stolen cash. They funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into a fake shell company named Buckhead Royalty Holdings. The sole proprietor of that shell company is my sister-in-law, Keisha. She has been actively using stolen funds to buy designer gowns, luxury handbags, and throw extravagant baby showers while watching me work 80-hour weeks to survive. Keisha let out a high-pitched, panicked whine. She tried to stand up, her eyes darting toward the main exit doors at the back of the ballroom. She took 2 frantic steps away from her table before freezing in her tracks. Standing silently in front of the heavy mahogany exit doors were Julian elite security personnel. They had quietly taken their positions when the lights dimmed. Their arms were crossed, their stances wide and imposing. The main exits were completely blocked. There was absolutely no way out of the room. Keisha sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands and beginning to sob hysterically. "This entire evening," I announced, addressing the shocked crowd, "has been funded by the very woman my mother loves to call ungrateful. For the past 6 months, I was tricked into wiring $12,000 a month to my mother because she lied and told me her home was being foreclosed on. She cried on the phone, begging for my help. In reality, she was extorting me to pay the monthly interest on the very same loans she took out under my stolen identity." Pastor Thomas shook his head slowly, looking at my mother with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. The wealthy society women were actively whispering now, their previous admiration completely replaced by ruthless judgment. My mother carefully constructed image of the pious sacrificing matriarch was being systematically ripped to shreds in front of the only people whose opinions she truly cared about. Yvonne gripped the acrylic podium, her knuckles white. Her silver designer gown suddenly seemed to mock her very existence. "This is a lie," she stammered, her voice frantic and completely lacking its usual authority. "She is making all of this up to embarrass us. These documents are forged. My daughter is a vindictive liar trying to humiliate me because she is jealous of our success." I smiled, a cold, empty smile. I knew she would try to deny the paperwork. Narcissists always deny the paper trail until they are entirely cornered by their own actions. "I am so glad you mentioned humiliation, Mother," I said, raising the remote one final time, because words can be denied and paperwork can be questioned. But raw, unedited, high-definition video is an entirely different matter. I want everyone here to see exactly how this family reacts when I refuse to fund their luxury lifestyle anymore. I pressed the button. The static images of bank documents vanished from the massive 20-foot screen. They were instantly replaced by the crystal-clear security footage captured just days ago inside my downtown corporate office. The video began playing silently, but the visual violence was absolute and overwhelming. The elite audience gasped in sheer terror as they watched Darius burst into my glass-walled boardroom, his face contorted in a mask of unhinged feral rage. They watched in horror as he screamed at me, throwing his arms around wildly like a deranged maniac. They saw Keisha standing right beside him, pointing aggressively in my face and demanding money. Then the climax of the video played out in larger-than-life high definition. The entire ballroom let out a collective shriek as they watched Darius pick up the heavy acrylic display stand and hurl it violently across my office. They watched my beautiful framed business award shatter into countless jagged pieces on the plush carpet. They watched Darius deliberately, maliciously stomp on the broken glass, pacing around my boardroom like a violent predator. The stark contrast was incredibly damning. The guests were looking back and forth between the man in the elegant velvet smoking jacket standing on the stage and the violent, unhinged thug destroying an executive office on the screen. The polished billionaire facade was dead. He was exposed as nothing more than a dangerous, entitled parasite. "Turn it off!" My mother shrieked, her voice breaking into a hysterical pitch. She slapped her hands against the top of the podium, desperately trying to block the projector beam with her own body. "Turn it off, Maya. It is fake. It is a fake video. You hired actors. You manipulated the footage." Her denial was so pathetically absurd that several people in the audience actually scoffed out loud. The video clearly showed her son and her daughter-in-law acting like absolute criminals. There was no deep fake technology that could mask the raw, unfiltered violence of Darius throwing a heavy object across a corporate boardroom. Julian stepped forward, his presence looming over my mother like a dark storm cloud. "The video is authentic," Julian stated, his voice booming through the sound system. "And the documents you and your son just eagerly signed without reading a single page are also entirely authentic." I lowered the remote, looking at my family as they finally began to realize the sheer catastrophic magnitude of what they had just done. The illusion of their wealth was gone. The respect of their church community was gone. The admiration of their peers was permanently gone. The ballroom that was supposed to host their ultimate coronation had transformed into a public execution chamber for their reputations. I stood tall, my black gown reflecting the harsh light of the projector screen. I did not feel a single drop of pity for the people panicking on the stage next to me. I had endured decades of emotional abuse, manipulation, and financial theft. I had worked myself to the bone while they lived comfortably on the fruits of my stolen identity. They had pushed me into a corner and expected me to quietly accept my role as their eternal victim. Instead, I had burned their entire universe to the ground, using nothing but the blazing heat of the absolute truth. And the execution was not even finished yet. Darius stared wildly at the blank projector screen, his chest heaving as the catastrophic reality of the video footage finally pierced through his thick skull. The velvet smoking jacket he wore suddenly looked like a cheap costume. The illusion of his billionaire status was evaporating right in front of his eyes, leaving behind nothing but the pathetic, violent fraud he truly was. He whipped his head around to face my husband, his features contorted in a mask of absolute unhinged desperation. "You promised us a $2 million trust!" Darius screamed, his voice cracking and echoing harshly across the massive ballroom. "You stood right there in front of everyone and said you were funding a trust for the family. You said we were securing generational wealth." Julian stepped forward deliberately, closing the distance between them. The polite, accommodating son-in-law was completely gone. In his place stood the apex predator of the corporate finance world, a man who dismantled hostile companies for sport. His voice dropped to a glacial chill that seemed to instantly freeze the air in the room. "I promise to make things right," Julian stated, his tone devoid of a single ounce of mercy. "And I always keep my promises." "You did not sign a trust tonight, Darius. Neither did your mother." Darius shook his head frantically, pointing a trembling finger at the front row where Harrison had secured the locked steel briefcase. "We saw the cover. We saw the gold seals. We signed the beneficiary paperwork." "You saw a piece of leather," Julian corrected smoothly, his dark eyes locking onto my brother. "What you and your mother just eagerly signed under the direct supervision of two state-licensed notaries were full, legally binding confessions to federal wire fraud and identity theft. You just meticulously documented every single financial crime you committed against my wife over the past 10 years. My mother let out a strangled, breathless gasp, clutching the sides of the acrylic podium as her knees visibly buckled. "But that is not all," Julian continued, his voice ringing with absolute lethal authority. "You also just signed a voluntary asset forfeiture agreement. By placing your signatures on those yellow and blue tabs, you legally transferred the deed to the suburban mansion, the titles to your luxury vehicles, and every single cent parked inside Keisha bank accounts directly over to Maya Corporate Holding Company. You just willingly surrendered all your assets to pay back the $500,000 you stole. You are broke, Darius. You own absolutely nothing." The silence that followed Julian's words lasted for only a fraction of a second, before complete, unadulterated pandemonium erupted in the ballroom. The heavy, suffocating tension snapped, and the room exploded into a cacophony of shocked gasps, furious whispers, and outright shouting. The elite members of Atlanta high society, the people my mother had spent her entire life trying to impress, turned on her with vicious, immediate speed. The same wealthy church wives who had been nodding respectfully at her speech just minutes ago were now actively pulling their smartphones out of their designer clutches. Bright flashes illuminated the dim room as dozens of guests began recording the spectacular, unprecedented downfall of Yvonne and Darius. The social execution was absolute. Guests were pointing at the stage, their faces twisted in disgust as they loudly discussed the forged mortgages, the stolen identity, and the violent video footage. The elegant, refined atmosphere of the five-star Buckhead Hotel was completely destroyed, replaced by the chaotic energy of a public reckoning. In the front row, Keisha let out a piercing, hysterical wail. She scrambled out of her chair, dropping her stolen Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag onto the carpeted floor, as if the expensive leather had suddenly caught fire. She clutched her pregnant belly, sobbing uncontrollably as the realization crashed down on her. The fake shell company she had managed was gone. The money she had eagerly spent was gone. The luxury life she had bragged about on social media was a total illusion, and she was now legally tied to a massive federal fraud investigation. She was surrounded by the elite women she had tried to make jealous, and they were all watching her weep with expressions of sheer contempt. On the stage, the reality of her utter destruction finally broke my mother. The grand, arrogant matriarch who had ruled our family with an iron fist, who had demanded $25,000 a month just days ago, completely collapsed. Yvonne's legs gave out, and she fell hard onto the carpeted stage, her expensive silver designer gown pooling around her in a pathetic heap. She was trembling violently, her carefully styled hair falling into her face as she looked out at the sea of judging eyes recording her every movement. Desperation clawed at her throat. She needed a lifeline. She needed the one man who could possibly salvage her spiritual reputation. "Pastor Thomas." My mother cried out, her voice a ragged, humiliating beg. She crawled forward on her knees toward the edge of the stage, reaching her hands out to the religious leader she had spent decades trying to impress. "Pastor, please. You know me. You know my heart. This is a misunderstanding. Please tell them I am a good woman. Tell them I am a woman of God." Pastor Thomas stood up from his chair in the front row. He buttoned his suit jacket, his face set in a mask of righteous, unforgiving disgust. He looked down at my mother groveling on the stage, the woman who had proudly directed his church events and organized his charity drives using funds stolen from her own daughter. "The Lord sees everything, Yvonne," Pastor Thomas said, his voice booming with profound disappointment. "He sees the wicked deeds done in the dark, and he eventually brings them to the light. You have defiled the sanctity of your family and brought shame upon our congregation. May God have mercy on your soul, because this community will not." Without another word, Pastor Thomas turned his back on my weeping mother. He adjusted his collar and walked purposefully down the center aisle of the ballroom, heading straight for the exit. He did not look back once. Several of the lead deacons and senior church members immediately followed his lead, shaking their heads in disgust as they walked out of the gala they had been tricked into attending. My mother let out a guttural, agonizing scream of pure social agony as she watched her entire world walk out the door. The ultimate rejection from her pastor was the final fatal blow to her narcissism. She crumpled onto the floor of the stage, burying her face in her hands, weeping loudly in front of the flashing phone cameras of the remaining guests. Darius, however, did not collapse in sorrow. The realization that he was no longer a wealthy venture capitalist, that his luxury cars were gone, and that his golden child status had just been publicly, legally obliterated, triggered a violent, animalistic rage. "You set us up!" Darius roared, his eyes wild and bloodshot, as he turned his fury entirely on Julian. "You set us up, you arrogant rich bastard!" With a primal scream, Darius lunged forward. He threw his entire body weight toward my husband, raising his fist, fully intending to tackle Julian to the floor of the stage in a blind fit of violent desperation. He never even made it within 3 feet. Julian did not flinch. He did not even take a step back. Before Darius could cross the distance, the 2 massive armed security guards who had been standing discreetly near the stage stairs moved with terrifying practiced speed. They intercepted my brother mid-lunge. One guard grabbed Darius by the shoulder, twisting his arm sharply behind his back in a brutal compliance hold, while the other guard swept his legs out from under him. Darius hit the stage floor with a heavy, sickening thud. The security team pinned him face down onto the carpet, pressing a heavy knee directly between his shoulder blades. Darius thrashed and kicked screaming obscenities into the floor, but he was completely immobilized. The velvet smoking jacket he was so proud of was bunched up around his neck, covered in dust from the stage floor. He looked exactly like the violent, out-of-control thug the video had proven him to be. "Stay down!" Julian commanded, his voice slicing through Darius' frantic yelling. "You have already humiliated yourself enough for one lifetime. Do not add assault to your federal charges." The ballroom was ringing with the sounds of my mother sobbing, my brother struggling against the security guards, and the relentless snapping of photographs from the audience. The spectacle was absolute. The destruction was total. I slowly walked across the stage, the fabric of my black evening gown gliding silently over the carpet. I stepped past the security guards holding my brother down and stopped right in front of my mother. She was still on her knees. Her silver dress ruined her makeup, streaked with heavy black tears. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading terror. She looked like a woman who finally realized she had played a deadly game and lost everything. "Maya," my mother choked out, reaching a trembling hand toward the hem of my dress. "Please. You are my daughter. You cannot do this to me. I gave you life." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no pity. The emotional well had run completely dry. I stepped back, ensuring her hands could not touch me. My voice was calm, clear, and carried the unwavering certainty of a woman who had finally reclaimed her own power. "You wanted an allowance to fund your luxury lifestyle," I said, staring directly into her terrified eyes. "You sat at the Thanksgiving table and demanded $25,000 a month, like it was your divine right. But all you ever did was steal my identity to fake your own. You built an empire of lies on my back, and you expected me to carry the weight of your fraud until it crushed me. She opened her mouth to beg again, but I cut her off, delivering the final definitive checkmate. The $12,000 a month stops today. I stated, my voice echoing in the silent spaces between her sobs. The house is mine. The cars are mine. The stolen funds will be returned to my accounts. You have absolutely nothing left to take from me. And so does my relation to you. You are not my mother anymore. You are just a criminal waiting for her sentence. I turned my back on her for the final time. I walked over to Julian, who offered me his arm. I wrapped my hand around his bicep, feeling the solid, unwavering support of the man who had helped me execute this flawless victory. We looked out at the sea of guests, the flashing cameras, and the ruined lives of the people who had tried to destroy me. We did not need to say another word. The trap had worked perfectly, and the execution was complete. But as we prepared to walk down the stage steps, the grand mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom violently swung open, and the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the hotel walls signaled that the night was about to reach its ultimate, inevitable conclusion. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding crash that rattled the crystal chandeliers above. The flashing red and blue lights from the emergency vehicles parked outside the hotel pierced through the sheer silk curtains, painting the opulent walls in the harsh, undeniable colors of law enforcement. The illusion of the elite Buckhead Gala was instantly shattered, replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of a federal raid. A team of federal agents strode into the room, their dark tactical windbreakers standing in sharp, jarring contrast to the sea of custom tuxedos and designer evening gowns. Leading the pack was Detective Washington, a tall, impeccably stern man whose reputation in the Atlanta Financial Crimes Division preceded him. He moved with absolute, uncompromising authority, his gaze sweeping over the terrified high society guests, who immediately scrambled backward, parting like the Red Sea to give the authorities a clear, unobstructed path to the stage. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, save for the heavy, rhythmic thud of the agents' combat boots marching across the polished marble floor. The wealthy church wives, the deacons, and the prominent business owners held their breath, their smartphone cameras still raised, capturing every single agonizing second of my family's ultimate ruin. Julian, lead attorney, Harrison, stepped out from the front row to meet Detective Washington halfway down the center aisle. Harrison carried the reinforced steel briefcase containing the absolute destruction of my mother and brother. He placed the briefcase on a nearby catering table, snapped the combination locks open, and retrieved the heavy leather binders. Detective Washington Harrison said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. Inside these binders, you will find the fully executed notarized confessions to federal wire fraud and identity theft, signed mere moments ago by Yvonne and Darius. Additionally, we have provided the complete forensic audit detailing the theft of $500,000, the forged commercial loan applications, and the routing numbers for the fraudulent shell company. Everything is perfectly organized and ready for immediate prosecution. Detective Washington took the heavy binders, his eyes scanning the freshly stamped notary seals. He gave a sharp, definitive nod to his team of agents. "Execute the warrants," he commanded. Two federal agents marched directly up the carpeted steps of the stage, bypassing my mother completely and heading straight for Darius. My brother was still pinned face down on the floor by Julian private security team. His custom velvet smoking jacket ruined his face, pressed humiliatingly into the carpet. Julian's security guards stepped back, seamlessly transferring custody to the federal authorities. The agents hauled Darius roughly to his feet. He was trembling violently. His previous arrogance entirely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a cowardly, sniveling fraud. "You have the right to remain silent." One of the federal agents recited, his voice booming through the ballroom as he twisted Darius' arms behind his back. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs snapping shut around my brother's wrists echoed like a gunshot. Darius began to weep loud, ugly, desperate sobs that stripped away every ounce of his manufactured dignity. He looked wildly around the room, searching for someone, anyone to save him. "Mom, do something!" Darius shrieked, his voice cracking as the agents dragged him toward the edge of the stage. "Tell them it was your idea. Tell them you made me do it. Do not let them take me to prison. I cannot go to prison." He was throwing his own mother directly under the bus to save his own skin, proving exactly how deep their family loyalty truly ran. It was a spectacular display of cowardice. The wealthy businessman Darius had been bragging to just an hour ago watched him with profound disgust, shaking their heads at the pathetic spectacle. Down in the front row, Keisha was experiencing her own total psychological collapse. She sat frozen in her gilded chair, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror, as she watched her husband being hauled off the stage in federal restraints. A female agent approached her table, standing over Keisha, with an imposing, uncompromising stance. "We are not arresting you tonight," the agent stated coldly, "but you are officially a person of interest in an ongoing federal investigation regarding the fraudulent shell company, Buckhead Royalty Holdings. Effective immediately, every bank account bearing your name is entirely frozen. Your assets are seized. That designer handbag you are clutching is considered evidence of wire fraud, and it will be confiscated before you leave this premises." Keisha let out a guttural, agonizing wail. She dropped the stolen Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag as if the leather had suddenly turned to acid. The absolute reality of her situation crashed down upon her pregnant belly. She had no money. She had no home because the deed to the mansion had just been signed over to me. Her fake corporate accounts were gone. Her luxury lifestyle was completely eradicated. She was absolutely broke, entirely homeless, and married to a convicted felon who was currently being dragged out of the ballroom in handcuffs. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing so hysterically that she began to hyperventilate, completely ignored by the society women she had tried so desperately to make jealous. On the stage, Detective Washington approached my mother. Yvonne was still on her knees, her elaborate silver designer gown bunched up around her, her flawless makeup ruined by streaks of mascara and panicked tears. She looked up at the towering detective, her eyes wide with a desperate feral terror. "Yvonne, you are under arrest for identity theft, federal wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes," Detective Washington announced, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "Stand up." My mother refused to move. She clung to the base of the acrylic podium, shaking her head violently. "No," she wailed, her voice shrill and pleading. "You do not understand. I am a pillar of the community. I am the head of the event committee at my church. I am a woman of God. You cannot do this to me. This is a private family matter." "My daughter is just confused." Detective Washington signaled to a female agent who stepped forward, grabbing my mother by the arm and hauling her forcefully to her feet. My mother thrashed and struggled, fighting against the agent grip, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her refined, high society persona. She looked like a wild, cornered animal. "Take your hands off me," Yvonne screamed, her voice echoing horribly through the grand ballroom. "I built this family. I sacrificed everything. Maya, tell them to stop." The female agent expertly twisted my mother's arms behind her back, ignoring the frantic struggling. The cold, heavy steel handcuffs snapped tightly around her wrists, the metal contrasting sharply with the expensive diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. The physical restraint broke the last of her resistance, and she sagged against the agent, weeping loudly. "Maya is an ungrateful, wicked daughter," my mother shrieked to the silent, watching crowd, desperately trying to spin the narrative one last time. "I gave her life. I raised her. She is doing this because she hates to see her family prosper. She is a traitor to her own blood." Nobody in the audience believed a single word. The high society friends she had tried to impress simply turned their backs on her. The wealthy deacons shook their heads in profound shame. The evidence projected on the massive 20-foot screen behind the stage was absolute and undeniable. They all knew she was a thief, a fraud, and a manipulative predator who had fed on her own child. The federal agents began the long, humiliating walk of shame, escorting my mother down the carpeted steps of the stage and into the center aisle of the ballroom. They paraded her directly through the crowd of her elite peers. The society photographers who had been hired to document her grand triumph were now eagerly snapping relentless photos of her in handcuffs, her face twisted in agony, her silver gown dragging heavily across the floor. She was going to be on the front page of every local news site by morning. As the agents escorted her down the aisle, they approached the spot where Julian and I were standing. I stood tall, my posture perfectly straight, my black evening gown making me look like the absolute authority in the room. My face was a mask of cold, unwavering stone. I felt absolutely no pity, no regret, and no sorrow. I only felt the profound, breathtaking weight of justice. My mother dug her heels into the carpet, forcing the agents to stop right in front of me. She looked at me, her eyes swimming in dark tears, her arrogance completely shattered. The matriarch who had ruled my life with fear and manipulation was reduced to a pathetic broken shell begging for her life. "Maya, please, my mother," wept, her voice dropping to a desperate, ragged whisper. "Please, I am begging you. I am your mother. I am your flesh and blood. Do not let them take me to prison. I will do anything. I will give it all back. Please have mercy on me. I am so sorry." I looked at the woman who had stolen my identity, ruined my credit, funded a lazy brother with my hard-earned money, and threatened to destroy my corporate reputation without a single second thought. I looked at the woman who had demanded $25,000 a month with a smug, entitled smirk on her face just a few days ago. I did not blink. I did not soften. I stared back at her with absolute zero emotion, my voice perfectly clear and devastatingly calm. "You told me at Thanksgiving that this is how families help each other step up," I said, delivering the words slowly, letting each syllable cut deep into her soul. "You were right. I am stepping up." I leaned in just slightly, ensuring my final words would echo in her mind for every single day she spent sitting in a federal prison cell. "Have a happy holiday, Mother." I turned my back on her, signaling that the execution was completely finished. The federal agents immediately pulled her forward, dragging her sobbing and screaming out of the grand ballroom and into the flashing lights of the police cruisers waiting outside. I stood next to Julian, feeling the absolute, undeniable peace of a woman who had finally reclaimed her entire life. 6 months later, the chaotic dust from that explosive, highly public night had finally settled over the sprawling city of Atlanta. Instead, they were both currently serving lengthy sentences in a maximum security federal prison for identity theft and systematic wire fraud. The woman who demanded an absurd monthly allowance to fund a fictitious legacy was now wearing a standard-issue federal uniform. Her beloved social status was permanently erased. Darius fared absolutely no better in the eyes of the law. Stripped of his stolen funds and his imaginary tech empire, he faced the judge as an entitled fraud. He was sent to a federal facility, his dreams of a Buckhead mansion replaced by a concrete cell. My corporate accountants moved swiftly to execute the terms of the voluntary asset forfeiture agreement. The sprawling suburban mansion my mother fraudulently purchased under my name was seized by my holding company. We sold it above asking price to a family relocating here. The proceeds completely wiped out the $500,000 fraudulent mortgage instantly. We aggressively liquidated Darius luxury vehicles and reclaimed every hidden dollar parked inside Keisha fake shell company. By the end of the second month, the massive debt anchored to my Social Security number was eradicated, and my pristine credit score was flawlessly restored. As for Keisha, her spectacular downfall was a brutal lesson in the consequences of unchecked greed. With her fraudulent company seized, the glamorous lifestyle she relentlessly flaunted on social media dissolved overnight. She was forced to pack her non-confiscated belongings and move back into her childhood bedroom at her parents' modest home. The $4,000 gown she wore to the gala was seized as evidence along with her Birkin bag. Her glamorous online social media accounts went entirely dark. She desperately wanted to be the envy of Atlanta society, but ended up relying completely on her parents' grace to survive. I stood in my downtown executive office, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows at the brilliant Atlanta skyline. The afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow over the city, mirroring the profound lightness in my spirit. The suffocating weight of my toxic family was gone. The constant crushing, underlying anxiety of being emotionally and financially extorted had vanished entirely. Without the $12,000 monthly drain, my luxury consulting firm exploded with unprecedented growth. We tripled our revenue in just 2 quarters. The high-profile corporate clients who attended the infamous gala did not flee in the wake of the scandal. Instead, my decisive, ruthless handling of the situation solidified my reputation as a highly capable, formidable chief executive officer. They respected a woman who could protect her assets with such flawless precision. I secured contracts larger and more lucrative than I had ever imagined possible. The heavy mahogany doors of my corner office swung open, interrupting my quiet, peaceful reflection. Julian walked in carrying 2 steaming cups of espresso from the artisanal cafe across the street. He looked incredibly handsome, his dark charcoal suit jacket unbuttoned, and his demeanor completely relaxed and content. He crossed the expansive office, stepping right to where I stood by the glass. He handed me a cup and wrapped his free arm around my waist, pulling me flush against his side. He pressed a warm kiss to my forehead. "You are working late again," Julian teased softly, his dark eyes tracing the skyline with me. "You own the building now. You are allowed to take a break." I smiled, leaning my head against his broad shoulder. "I am not working," I replied, taking a slow sip of the rich espresso. "I am just admiring the beautiful view." He hummed in agreement, his grip on my waist tightening affectionately. "It is a beautiful empire you have built, Maya, and it is completely yours." I looked out over the city, reflecting on the brutal but necessary journey that brought me to this exact moment. For so many years, I was imprisoned by the cultural expectation of the black tax. I allowed the heavy burden of familial guilt to dictate my finances, my boundaries, and my peace of mind. I was taught that blood loyalty meant sacrificing my own well-being to elevate people who refused to elevate themselves. But that explosive night at the Buckhead Hotel fundamentally reshaped my understanding of family. Loyalty is not a weapon to be wielded by manipulators. Guilt is only as powerful as you allow it to be. If you hand toxic people the sword, they will inevitably use it to bleed you dry. I learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let the people dragging you underwater sink under their own weight. I did not just get revenge against my mother and my brother. I executed a complete reclamation of my entire existence. I took back my stolen name. I reclaimed my financial identity. I secured my future against the very people who should have protected it. The narrative of the difficult, ungrateful daughter was dead and buried. In its place stood a woman who defined her own worth. Julian raised his espresso cup, turning slightly to face me. "To peace," he said, his voice vibrating with absolute sincerity. "To the end of the noise and the beginning of everything else." I raised my cup, clinking it gently against his. The soft ceramic sound echoed pleasantly in the calm, bright sanctuary of my office. "To our empire," I answered, looking into the eyes of the man who stood by me while I burned my past to the ground. We drank our coffee in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to flicker on as the evening approached. I was completely free from the ghosts of my past, unburdened by false obligations, and finally ready to conquer whatever came next. The extortion was over. The entire family facade was shattered, and my real life, the one I actually deserved, had officially begun.